The first thing is that I think I always had a testimony. I always felt that there was a God. And I think probably my life began a little bit when my parents joined the church. I don't remember my dad before that, but my mom told me that he used to, go out with the guys and drink and play games and all that and smoke. And I don't remember any of that. So my beginning is really where that starts. I don't remember much before that. We lived in an apartment in Maine, in Waterville, and I had a couple experiences there. My mom would tell me, don't do this, and I learned some things from that. Like one day I wanted to go out and play in the snow, and my mom said, you can go out, but we had a metal roof on the apartment, and she said, if you go out, don't go near those because the snow's heavy, in the spring it melts a little bit and starts to come down and get heavy and ready to fall off the roof. And my first thing was I went out and looked up and it fell down in my eyes. And because of that, it was interesting. I always have this picture in my mind of being buried under snow, but I saw people standing around me. And when I guess it knocked me out a little bit because Mom said there weren't any people standing around me. And I sometimes wondered if it was my ancestors or something that were kind of concerned. But anyway, I ended up having to go to the doctors because I hurt my eye, and I had to wear a black patch for like a month over my eye. And so that was one experience where Mom said, don't do it, and I did it. And then there was another, we had a little girl that lived across the street, and she liked to come over and play, but she had some kind of contagious disease that you didn't get unless you ate something she ate. And I had this great big all-day sucker that my mother or somebody had given me. And I was playing in the dirt and it got dirty. I just laid it down while I was playing with my little mud cakes or whatever. And this little girl wandered over and she said, oh, can I go wash it off for you? No, my mom said you can't touch it. And she just kept bugging me. And finally I said, fine, you can go wash it off, but don't lick it. Well, now there's no way I would know if she licked it now that I look back on it anyway. But she came across the street licking my lollipop, and I was so upset. But my mom had told me, and I listened this time. Well, I listened sort of, because I shouldn't have let her have it. But she told me not to. I couldn't eat anything that she ate because it was contagious, and I forget what it was, but it was very contagious. So then there was another time my mom told me, do not stick your hands in the wringer. Back then you had these old washers where you washed in the tub and then you put it through a little spin cycle that wrung out the water. And it would go really fast, but it was all open. Nothing was closed. You didn't put a cover on it. And I was standing there watching her do this, and she said, don't put your fingers in that wringer because it's not going to feel good if you do. And what did I do? I put my fingers in the wringer. Anyway, I think early on I learned that maybe I shouldn't do something that my mom said I shouldn't do. So the next incident in that particular apartment was my cousin came over, and it was winter, and my mother had said, do not stick your tongue on that pipe, because if you do, you won't be able to get it off, because it was winter in Maine and it was very cold. So I had learned by that time that I didn't want to do what my mom said not to do. So instead I talked my cousin into doing it, and she stuck her tongue on the pipe, and she could not get her tongue off, and my mom came up and I felt really bad. But anyway, I had learned by that time I better not do any more. I think I was a lot better. I learned from those little experiences that maybe I should listen. So anyway, then they joined the church, okay? And I don't remember anything. I don't remember my dad after that, but I have stories that I'll talk about later that go along with their history a little bit. Shortly after that, we moved to Maine. We moved to Madison in the country. We lived in Madison, Maine, out in the country. My dad, and this kind of goes along with their little history, had decided he was going to go look for a house, but they had just gone through a winter with no work and no down payment, and he felt impressed to go look for a house. And my mother thought, right, you're going to buy a house with no money. And he asked around. He wanted a farm, and he asked around, and so people said, wow, we know this one that's nobody's lived in for years. Maybe you should check into that. So he checked into it, and I'd have to look up the exact amounts, but they were able to move in for like a few $100s, because all they had to do was pay the back taxes, which back then was a lot less than it is now, and take over the mortgage payments, which were like $100 a month or something really cheap back then. And it was really cheap, but the house was really, really dirty. The people who lived in it had a lot of animals in the house, and it was really nasty. And my mom and I was about 5 at the time when we moved there. We had a lot of mud that we had to clean up off the floors, and she took bucket load after bucket load washing it. And Dad, because he was in construction, he was able to clean it, fix it up, put cabinets in. It didn't have kitchen cabinets, didn't have a bathroom. It had a little outhouse in the shed, and we used it for a while. It was pretty creepy with all those little spiders running around and cold. And so he quickly put in the bathroom. We had a lot of water at this house. It had an artesian well, and that meant there's some kind of underwater body of water down under the ground, and so we had a lot of water. I don't remember ever running out of water there. It was very good tasting water. So they fixed that up. I had some experiences while I was living there that strengthened my testimony, and also tell you a little bit about what's going on with we had a lot of animals, a lot of dogs, a lot of cats, and a lot of, we had chickens and pigs and cows and ponies and horses. And so we had a lot of experiences with those animals. One of the experiences I had, and this kind of goes along with the Spirit, I think the Spirit acts with children. I don't know how old I was, but I was old enough to have a few younger brothers and sisters at this time, and we liked to play all over the place. We had gone up behind the house to play, and our dog ran past us. And I had this really weird feeling come over me. That's not unnormal to have a dog run past you. But I just had this feeling come over me, and then a few minutes later, he ran back past towards the house. And at that time, the feeling got stronger. So I told my brothers and sisters that I felt like we shouldn't run. I don't know why I felt that way, but I felt like we needed to go back home and we needed not to run. And so we walked back home, and just as we got to the door, the dog ran past us into the house. And so I went in and I told my mom, well, the dog was acting kind of strange. So she put us in a bedroom, and people were painting our house, so she asked them to kind of help her figure out how to get the dog out of the house and that. So they did get the dog out of the house, and then nobody knew where it went. But later we found it had died underneath the porch, and it had died of some kind of distemper or something, some dog related thing that makes them kind of crazy just before they. So I feel like the spirit told us, that I needed to be careful and get my brothers and sisters back. So another experience I had, but not with dogs. My sister, I was babysitting, my parents weren't around. They were not even in the state. They had gone to visit. I don't know if they went down for their calling in Boston or whether they were down visiting Connecticut. And I was old enough to babysit while they were out of town. So it had to be when I was, but I couldn't drive. So I was probably about 14 when this happened. She had a friend come over and they wanted to ride the pony. And the pony, my mom said, you can ride the pony, but don't take it out of the fence part. She didn't want to worry about him running off. And we weren't the best or most expert riders of ponies. We could put the saddle on. Anyway, her friend was riding the pony and she didn't want to ride it in the fenced-in area, and so I don't know. She talked my sister into going up behind the house, which had no fences really. And I was babysitting. I heard some yelling, and I came to the porch door in time to see them come around the corner. And my sister was riding the pony, and it stopped. There was a little. We had a porch and had a little corner there. It came around the house and went into this corner and stopped for a minute. And I thought if I could just sneak over there and get it. But then as I got close, it spooked and went right across for the road. And as they were heading for the road, I saw a pulp truck coming. A big, it didn't have any wood on it. It had another horse on it. And so I was praying and praying and praying that the horse would stop, because she was trying to stop it. And then I realized it wasn't going to stop. So I prayed that it would speed up and that this truck would miss it, because I knew something was going to happen. And anyway, the pony got hit. The back end of the pony got hit just enough that it killed the pony instantly, but it threw my sister forward and she landed sitting up. And my uncle came over and because nobody was there old enough to deal with this, they had this, the police there and stuff to check out the accident. And they asked my sister if she was okay, and she said, yeah. But that night, I was old enough and had done enough scouting and, women camps that I could tell when somebody was in shock. And so sometime during the night, I realized she was in shock because she had a fever, and I was scared because I was 12 miles out in the country and I didn't know how I was going to get anybody there to do anything or what to do. And I remember praying a lot of the night that she would be okay. And the next morning I called my aunt, who rides a lot of horses, and she was livid that they hadn't taken her somewhere and had her checked, because she had a friend who had fallen off a horse and hit her head, and she died during the night because she had some kind of injury inside her head that caused bleeding. And so she was really unhappy that they didn't take her, but she took her to the doctors to have her checked out. And it happened to be Conference Sunday, and my sister insisted that she had to listen to this on my aunt's radio, who wasn't a member. And she still remembers, having my aunt listen to this while she goes to the doctors. She was doing much better in the morning, and I really feel that the prayer helped. All right, next one's the pony that got shot. We got a call from our neighbor. I was the oldest child, so I always ended up doing things that most people don't have to do. But anyway, Our neighbor called and said that it looked like there were hunters beside the road in a car and that they might have shot our pony out there. And so my mother, I don't know what she was thinking, because I would never do this, said to me, you need to go check the pony and see if it's shot. Well, these hunters are still sitting there with their guns, and I'm thinking I'm old enough to know this is not a safe situation that I'm going into. So I'm crawling through 2 pastures, and I'm thinking that's probably not too smart to be crawling in the first place. I'm crawling out there to see what's wrong, and at first it didn't seem like anything was wrong, and then I found that it had shattered the leg, and so it couldn't move. It was shivering, but like, anyway, it couldn't move, and so it had to be put down. But that's one experience. It was kind of okay. I had a lot of experiences with dogs and ponies and all that, but those were most dramatic ones. We did have one where there was a bear. We had a mother and a colt down in that pasture, and a bear came out, and our neighbor called us again and said, there's a bear down there. And my mother wanted me to go down. No, I didn't go down in the pasture. No way. I do not. But I got down there. I walked down the road. A truck had stopped, and the guy was trying to figure out what's going on because the horse were rearing up, and he saw the bear. But as he stepped on the back of the truck, it made a big bang. It let go, something let go, and it scared the bear away. So they were okay, and my dad moved them to another pasture that was closer to the house after that. But that was another pony. Another dog experience, though. My aunt had come over to, very often we'd get together. And we'd had a thunderstorm the night before, and I had heard something weird, and Mom said, oh, it's just the thunderstorm. Okay. But the next day, the kids went to play in the playhouse, and everybody came back running in and saying, there's something in the playhouse. And I was the oldest, so guess who got to go check it out? And so we had screen on the window, so we couldn't see into the playhouse with this screening unless you got right up close. At first I climbed on the roof thinking maybe I could lean down and look in, but I couldn't without falling off. So then I had to get right up to the screen, and I'm looking in, and what's staring back at me but a German Shepherd, and I'm like freaking out, like, oh, so then I went in and told my mother, there's a German Shepherd in there and I can't get him out. The door would push in, but my dad had a little spring thing on it so that it would shut automatically, and so the dog got in there, but he couldn't get back out because it had to be pushed in. It wasn't locked or anything. But so my mother, I don't know what she rigged up, something to push it in, so the dog, between her and my aunt, they got it out. Anyway, that was one of our other dog stories. When I was growing up, I went to a one-room schoolhouse until I was in 2nd grade. When I went into 3rd, I went to Madison, to the big place. We were called East Madison, that little schoolhouse. And there is an interesting experience. I was in kindergarten and could not go home during the day because my mom did not have a car to take me home. So they would set up a cot for me. I'd take a little nap, and then the teacher would send me out to play outside. This was not a fenced-in playground. And I'm standing out back, and all of a sudden I see this big cat. It looked like a panther to me. Walk past. And I was petrified. I just stayed there until it went by. And I ran into the school and I told my teacher, and she said, they don't have panthers here. But I have since learned that Maine does have, or used to have, panthers. Way long time ago. This looked like a panther. She thought maybe it was a fisher cat, but as I got older, I looked into it, and this looked like a panther, and I think it was a panther. I don't care what that teacher said, and I don't care how young I was. It looked like a panther. Anyway, that was at that little one-room schoolhouse. I was the oldest daughter. So I had to do a lot of things that maybe younger ones didn't. I started doing dishes when I was like 5 years old. My mom would wash them and I would dry them. And then it progressed so that I had to take turns washing and she'd dry them. And then when my sister got big enough, we would do the dishes at night, switching off and on. And my mom had this real good routine, like we wash the floors on Monday, we do the laundry on this day, we iron on this day, we cook on this day. And when we did it, it was an all-day adventure practically. Only I didn't really feel like it was an adventure. I kind of likened it to my name and felt like Cinderella sometimes because I was oldest. And I folded so many cloth diapers, I could not believe it. And so it was kind of a blessing when I got older. My husband didn't like cloth diapers very much, and I ended up with disposable. So I didn't have to deal with the cloth diapers after that. But anyway, I was a skinny, bucktooth, wore hand-me-down clothes. I felt like a ragamuffin a lot because I was so skinny and bucktooth. And my mom would cut my hair and curl it, these weird curl whatever. I liked it when I had braids and stuff a lot, but she liked to have my hair shorter because she didn't think you could get lice easily or something, I don't know, at school. But I hated my hair. I felt very ugly. And so I had a lot of feelings of inadequacy because of that. I was kind of shy. I wasn't good at math. I was terrible at math. My math teacher lived down the road. She thought I was too skinny, and she thought our whole family had two skinny kids, that my mom wasn't feeding us well enough. But we had plenty of food. In fact, we practically ate another meal before we went to bed, and my mother always made sure we had you had to have certain colored vegetables, and and she always had dessert. You had to eat your food, and then you get your dessert. But she always made sure we ate a lot. And this teacher really thought we were not getting fed. One of my trauma things was when I went to get my driver's license. I had to go 4 times, and they still wouldn't give it to me. The last time I did everything right, but he thought I was too timid. And so he didn't give it to me. I was so upset. And I only had one more time to try, I think. Maybe I got it the 4th time. I don't know, but I went at least 4 times. I might have got it the 4th time. The last time I went, I know that they weren't going to let me have another time until I got a little older or something. I don't know what, but they weren't going to let me come back for a few months because I'd been back so much. I finally got my license. And speaking of license, when I got my license and my mom had me take, because back then you had primary and young women in the middle of the week. Well, I got my license, we were going to young women. And my sister's friend and my sister rode to Mutual with me. And when we were going home, obviously it was dark out, and they were waving their arms out the windows and stuff, and a carload of guys thought that was a come on. So we had to go 12 miles, mind you, into the dark on a very foggy night with these guys trailing behind us. And we usually took the shortcut, but I didn't dare take the shortcut because I didn't know what I would do. If I took the little bit longer way around, my uncle lived about halfway, and I figured I'd go up they had a long driveway, but I'd go up and get rid of these guys, but we couldn't get rid of them. In fact, this is another time when I prayed because I was scared. They wouldn't give up, and it was foggy, and I prayed that the fog would lift enough so that, because at one point they pulled around in front of us and cut us off, and I'm like, please clear this so I can go around them, because I didn't dare pass them in the fog. And I was able to. It cleared, and I was able to go. And then when I got to my uncle's, I turned off, and they followed us up the driveway. It was a long driveway, but you could see the top from the road. And my uncle, I came knocking on the door, like really freaking out, and he comes out. So, what are you guys doing out there anyway? And they took off after that. But I was so scared. I was ready to strangle a couple of girls in the back seat. But we got home that night, and I really believe it was because of prayer. In my childhood, I didn't do a whole lot for sports, but my mom had me do ballet, but then I stopped after the first year because I was too young to do the toe ballet, and she figured it was a waste. She had a lot of kids, But then she had me do tap dance also. And tap dance, we did, the last year I was there, we were on television. There were 6 of us and 1 boy, and we all stayed together all the time. And that's why they put us on television. And we won, and we were supposed to go back again, but the lady in charge of it got really sick, and the program didn't happen, so we never did go back. But I was on television. I like to swim. I didn't do a lot of swimming, but I like to. And I like to ice skate because we had our little ponds, and so we did ice skate, but I was never very good. I was on the ground a lot. There was a little boy that every year would give me Christmas presents, and I always, because I was so ugly, I always made me feel good that this little boy, I wasn't ugly when I was little, but as I got older, I got worse. And anyway, he kept giving me gifts, and I never could figure out why. We didn't spend that much time together, but every year at Christmas, I got this gift. And since I have figured out, his grandfather owned the house we lived in that we bought, and I think he hoped that someday his grandson could marry me, and then it would come around again, so that, But then my last year in high school, I went to BYU, and when I came back, my parents were going to move, and this guy asked me out, and I went out with him. But then he found out that we were selling the house, and I never heard from him again. So I think all those years, I thought this little boy was in love with me. It was the house. That's what I think now, anyway. So I was shy. I guess if I had some advice, it would be, don't be afraid. Don't be so shy. I had a friend talk me into doing a speech contest. She was going to be in it, and then she was able to drop out, but they wouldn't let me drop out because too many people were dropping out. And so here's this shy kid having to do this speech contest in high school. And so I don't know. I got through it, but that's about all I can say. Probably it's because of church, because you have to do talks for church, And the other advice would be never go alone. Don't go alone and trust your instincts. Because growing up, we had several experiences where if I had been alone, when I look back on it, it was stupid to be doing what we were doing. We all got these nice, Brenda and Kathy and I, because Brenda was only a year older. These were the cousins, the key cousins. And we dressed all up, and we walked over to an ice cream stand to have a little treat. And we were all dressed up in Sunday dress. This is not a good place to be dressed up at night. And this carload of guys showed up, and they want to take us for a ride. And we're like, no, I don't think so. And we were on an island, basically. There was a river there was a big bridge and a river, and that it was on kind of an island part of it that this ice cream place was in. I didn't dare go this way or that way. And finally, I was praying again. I don't know if my cousins prayed, but I did. And I was praying somebody would come because we didn't dare leave. These guys wouldn't leave us alone and wouldn't leave. And so one of my cousin's friends that was staying with them, he was an older guy and he was out on a date. He and his date showed up and we told him our predicament and he took us home. We would have had to walk by the river up a hill to get to my cousin's house, past this old mill. It was a creepy place to be. So I would say never go, we weren't alone, but don't do anything stupid like dress up like, you know, whatever, like you really want to meet somebody and go to an ice cream place at night. And we were only about 12. So that was a bad experience. I had another experience where somebody he was watching us, my parents asked him, and he always volunteered, but he was saying things to me that I knew were wrong, and I was praying very hard because I knew I was about 12, and I knew that this was not a good thing, not a good place to be, and I'm sure that if I wasn't praying as hard as I was, I would have never made it through that night. And I immediately told my mom the next day, and we've found out since that multiple girls were, you know, in a bad way. And I really think it was the prayer that saved me. That was a bad experience. Now I won't go into all that. Oh, I babysat next door. That was an interesting experience. We lived next door to a policeman. And his wife used to be our neighbor on the other side at the house. Her grandmother raised her. And her grandmother did everything for her. So she wasn't really good at this cleaning house, taking care of babies, that kind of thing. And when I went to babysit, I would take lots of, before I drove, I would take a wagon over there and bring clothes over and wash clothes in my mother's laundry. And I would bring the baby over, and the first thing I did was give the baby a bath because it smelled so bad. She would have stuff stacked in the beds. I don't know how they slept at night. The beds were stacked with dirty clothes. They had things stacked in the bathtub, dirty clothes, and I would take everything that was movable and wash it all, bring it back, put their house all back together before they came home. And he loved me. I mean, he loved me as a babysitter. I wasn't that old. I was probably, I don't know, 13 or so. I was a good guy. And I remember one time I was driving a little car trying to get to an activity. I had started to learn to drive. I was going a little bit too fast. I knew I was going a little bit too fast, and he stopped me. He didn't know it was me, and I didn't know it was him. And he stopped me, and he goes, "Oh, I thought this was a stolen car." And I think it was just because he didn't want to give me a ticket because he liked me as a babysitter so much. So anyway, that's just a funny sideline, whatever you want to call it. During that time of growing up, that was when we went to visit. Sometimes my dad, went to Boston to meet with President Packer, and he didn't like to drive all alone, so he'd invite me to come. And I went with him because I was the oldest one. And so I got to eat ice cream sundaes with the Packers one time. And another time my cousin was with me, and we both went. And the Packers had a son, and the son had a friend, and they took us downtown in Boston and to see a couple of things. This was in the evening, so it was not like you went sightseeing. It was kind of like the teen hangout or something. And then we came back, and they had a little dance. I was very shy, though. I wouldn't dance. Which now it's like, that was so stupid because I was like a bump on the log, and it would have been a lot more fun if I loosened up a little bit, or wasn't so afraid, I remember my grandmother I was her first granddaughter, and so she took me to buy a tricycle. And I remember that, and I'm pretty sure she also bought me I had these nice furry Angora gloves, mittens. I lost one once, that was sad. But she's the one that bought those, I'm pretty sure. But I know she bought the tricycle. And it was nice when I went to my grandmother's. She was a very jolly person. Loved to cook all the time, breads and cookies, and so you loved the smell in her house. She only had one daughter and the rest were boys, so they were always wrestling. They were older now. They were men, married and stuff. But I remember them whenever they get together, they were wrestling and kidding with each other. And my grandmother always had this little cupboard with activities for us kids, so that we went there. Her house, I thought, was kind of a little bit on the cold, austere side. And I later found out that the original house was burned to the ground along with the barn, which was attached to the house, because my father and some of his siblings were out there playing with matches under the barn. And they thought they'd put it out, but it burned the house down. So when my grandfather rebuilt, he rebuilt with cinder blocks. So your inside walls and everything were cinder blocks. It was determined it was never going to burn again. And as far as I know, it's still around. So that's an interesting little sidelight. And along with burning houses down, my cousins were playing under the barn, which was attached to the house, with matches, and they thought they put it out, and they burned their whole house down and had no insurance to rebuild. So that was a sad day for them. When I was growing up, because we lived on the farm, I was constantly creating these little worlds. Like, if I was in a rock wall, we'd fix it so there was a living room here and a living room there, and create our own little house. We built tree houses because we had apple trees and they were good to build tree houses in. And Dad had a lot of leftover carpentry stuff. He let us use the scraps to build whatever we wanted. We'd build our own tree house. And one time he sold some lumber and they stripped the bark off down there. And so we went down and made little log cabins out of the strips, stacked. The only problem with it, the only way we could get in was to go through the top, because we had no way to figure out. I mean, you'd think we could have figured this out, but we had houses in the hay mow, all those bales of hay. We had tunnels in them, which was very dangerous, by the way. We were told you could get buried alive in hay mows. We had houses under the barn, in the silo. And I think that trained me for what I was going to be doing in my life, moving around, creating my little house wherever I went, because I just seemed to enjoy doing that growing up. When I was young, we went to the temple. You had to go all the way to Utah back then to go to a temple to be sealed as a family. And my father we had a sedan, not even a station wagon. He took out the back seat and put a bed in the trunk. He put food underneath the bed where your feet would go. He built a little bit of a space up in the window for the baby to sleep at night. And we stopped at people's houses, like cousins or relatives, on the way that my mom and dad knew. But I do remember trying to sleep in that car once or twice on the way out and back. And I was my sister Marcy was the baby, so there were only 4 of us kids and my parents. But we made it out and back. They were sealed in the Logan Temple. And I have to add this, because people were so dedicated trying to go to the temple, even if they didn't have the money or the whatever. My uncle and aunt decided to go, well, my Uncle Lenny. And just before they were to leave, he lost his job. This happened so many times with people. When they tried to go to the temple, it was like opposition would come. And anyway, he lost his job just before he was to leave, and he said, we're going to go anyway. So they did go out, and they came back, but they got about as far as New York and ran out of money. And they were sleeping in the car, and the policeman picked them up for vagrancy. They said, if you had no money in your pocket, you're a vagrant. And so I don't know where my aunt went, but they made my uncle go sit in the jail. And I don't know how they did this. But anyway, I guess somebody in the church around there helped them, so they got back home. And when he got back home, he did get a job again. It was a better job and all that. But they went through a lot just to get to the temple to be sealed. So I thought that was an interesting test of faith, you know. The turning point in my life, I would say, there were a couple. One, my dad joined the church. That changed my whole life because we didn't have smoking and drinking in our house, and Dad was totally different. He was very missionary oriented. And the other part, I would say, would be my patriarchal blessing, because there were things in there I had determined when I was about 13 or so, if I could have anything I wanted in my life, what would it be? What would be the most meaningful or most helpful thing to me? And I thought, well, you're not always happy when you're rich, so I don't care if I'm rich, but I do want enough food and all that. And finally I came up with happiness. If I had happiness, then I'd probably have just right amount of everything I needed, right? So I got my patriarchal blessing, and in it said, I bless you that you may have happiness. And I thought, what does that mean? I have since realized that happiness doesn't come from anything outside of yourself. It comes from within. Some people can be absolutely miserable with everything they need, and some people can be happy with nothing. And so it's all an inside thing. So if I'm happy or not depends on me. The Scouts would use our property, and they have lean-tos down there for little Scout programs and stuff, and there was a beaver pond down there. And my cousin and one of his friends went down there to swim. And during the day, we came down. They didn't know we were coming. But a couple of us went down, and we said, hello! And one of them cut himself trying to run and get dressed because he was swimming in his shorts. And you could hear the wild cats at night out there. We had a live beaver down there in that beaver pond. You could see his beaver house and everything. I remember taking a walk with my Uncle Chet. He liked to make fun things out of nature. He would make these little whistles with grass, and he liked to carve. He would take, I think it was spruce. They're like these little gummy pieces off a tree, and you chew it like gum. I don't know. He'd try that. But I remember going on a walk with him one time, and it seemed like in my memory that we went into an area that I'd never been in before. We went all over the property, but we didn't get too far out. If it, like it might have been in somebody else's for all I know, but we didn't, there were certain limits my parents had. We went a lot of places, and it was far enough away, and I said to my mom, how could you let us do that? You didn't even know. And she said, I could hear you. She said I'd worry about it if I couldn't, but it always echoed out and she could hear us playing wherever we were. So she didn't worry about it. And we went into an area that we never would have gone by ourselves. But we had an adult with us, and he took us out into the woods, and we came to this little pond, and it looked like an old canoe. And I don't know if he was telling us a story. And now when I look back, and I don't even know if I dreamt this, but it seemed like it was some Indian canoe, some old Indian canoe, which probably isn't. He's probably telling us something else. I don't know. But anyway, it stuck in my mind all these years. And another funny experience, this was with my cousin, actually with two of my cousins. My dad had baled the hay, and he told us we needed to pick it up and put it on the wagon. And we were teenagers by that time. I'm a girl, she's a girl, but one of my cousin's boyfriend came, and he helped us. We drove around the field, and we loaded this onto the trailer that my dad had on the back of our car, right? And we got that all done, and then my cousin's boyfriend was fooling around, and he threw the keys to the car into the briar patch. I mean, he didn't really mean to. It's just we were trying to get the keys, and all of a sudden, ran into the briar patch. Oh my goodness. He was so scared. He thought my dad was going to kill him. My dad didn't. He laughed. My dad laughed. He just thought it was funny. And he says, I got another set of keys, whatever. We never did find those keys. I don't know where those keys went, but they're gone. So that was one thing. And we had a big fair in our back field one time to raise money for the church. And my dad had made this dunking out of an old milk cooler, so you could throw the ball and somebody'd fall in. And so he made that, and I remember they had a lot of fun. They had homemade root beer, and I don't know what else games that went on, but people came and they raised money for the chapel. But that dunking thing stayed there for a while. And my cousin came to visit one time, my cousin Kathy, and she got up on there, and the thing gave away, and she fell into it, and she got soaking wet. We were supposed to go shopping, and we had done this to my aunt once before. She and I were always getting into trouble a little bit that way, because once before on my grandfather's farm, we had gone down the road and played in this big mud puddle just before we were supposed to go shopping. And when we got back, my aunt was furious, and she hosed us off with this ice cold water. So here was the second time we're thinking, ooh, we're in trouble. So we snuck into the house and put her clothes weren't that dirty in this water, but we rinsed her clothes out and threw it in the dryer to get it dry before her mother never knew, I don't think, this time. But anyway, because of the other experience we've had, figured we'd better get this cleared up. I don't know, we used to have a lot of fun. I didn't really want to go to school as far as a goal went. I had had enough of school. I really wanted to just settle down and get married. Well, my cousin went to BYU, and she talked me into it, and I thought, I can't go to school. I had secretarial training for 2 years. I didn't do any of the college prep classes, so I spent the next 2 years doing college prep classes. I still didn't do well in math, but I was able to get into BYU. And I was able to get around the math issue by studying English, which didn't require math. And so I did English. That's why I majored in English. I did have a goal to get married in the temple. And it was a blessing that I finally did go to BYU. And I had determined that if I didn't get accepted to BYU, I was going nowhere. I did not want to go to college. But because of my cousin, that changed my whole life, going to BYU. And having that experience where you meet roommates and other people from other countries, and just dealing with different personalities and backgrounds, and it was well worth the experience. I'm glad I went. I went 4 years, lived with 3 or 4 of my roommates for 4 years. I can't remember exactly, but I know Chris and Carla were. Carla and Kathy were 4 years, and Chris was, I think, 3 years. But some of them I had other ones. Some of them I kept in touch with. Laura I kept in touch with a little bit, but she was one of those long-term ones that we really enjoyed each other and had a lot of fun. I still see Carla. Chris was in the Tabernacle Choir, and she's since died of cancer. Kathy I ran into unexpectedly in the Chicago Temple. She didn't recognize me, and I'm not surprised. I don't look anything like the skinny person I was. But I recognized her. She was from England. Anyway, so we had a lot of fun with the people that we met there, and it was a good experience for me. And I was glad I went, even though I didn't really want to go to college. And in fact, it gave me a break because I was the oldest, and I had taken care of children so many hours and hours over the years as I was growing up. It gave me a break, where, in fact, it gave me a break till I was 28. As I wasn't till I was about 28 that I had my first child. One of the first experiences I had was with my bishop, who brings you in. You have to fill out a form, you know, what kind of callings you've had and what kind of, you know, what you enjoy doing. And he took me in to interview me, and he was kind of puzzled because you put what your level of, I had all kinds of callings from the time I was 12. I taught primary when I was 12 because back in those days, we were a small branch, and they needed every person they could get. And I remember teaching this little primary class, really young, and we were talking about, you know, how the Lord created vegetables and all that kind of stuff. And so at the end of the class, I asked this little girl to summarize, what did we learn today? And she said, we learned about salad, which I thought was kind of cute because we were talking about vegetables, and she put it in that context. But anyway, that doesn't really have much to do with the bishop, except that I had callings from the time I was 12 until I went to college, and I had a lot of callings. And so when I got to BYU, I knew there were a lot of kids out at school that probably didn't have all the callings I did. And so I had my interest level kind of down in the middle. Like, I didn't really care if I got a calling. And I knew out here, out west, there's a lot of people who don't have opportunities because there's so many people and fewer callings. So my level was down in the middle because I wanted a rest. So he called me in and he interviewed me. He says, I'm just a little curious. You had all these callings. Why are you not all that interested? And I told him exactly that I'd had callings since I was 12, and I was a little bit tired. I was willing to do anything he asked me to do, though. But since they put the interest level there, I put it there and I explained why, just like I said, you know. And so I got to pass out programs for a while. That was my intense calling when I first came to BYU because I wanted a rest. But I did end up typing towards the end, tithing receipts, stuff like that, which is unusual. But choosing jobs, let's see. I was a waitress. Well, first I was a babysitter. And then I was a waitress. I actually babysat at an art school for a professor one summer. And my math teacher, who thought I was starving, arranged that. And we would have meals all together. And I think they made sure I had plenty of food. She thought I was starving. I thought it was funny. So then I went to waitressing, and my aunt Shirley, my dad's sister, she owned a restaurant, and she only served home-cooked food. So they had homemade baked bread and homemade desserts, and when she made sandwiches, it was made with these slabs of homemade bread. So she had a lot of the truckers and stuff who really were hungry for homemade food came there, and she had it for quite a few years. I don't remember when it got sold, but I worked there when I first started working waitressing. And then I did a waitress job at Hart's Turkey Farm in New Hampshire. And when I'd come home, my mom would say she could tell when I was home because she could smell the cigarettes because they smoked so much at the turkey farm. It was a regular restaurant, but they called it Hart's Turkey Farm. And then I went to a grocery store cashier. A friend who actually ended up being my sister's sister-in-law got me a job working at a grocery store. While I was in college, during the summer, I would go work at this grocery store, and I loved working at the grocery store. I loved seeing the people, and it was back in those days when you had to punch in the numbers, you didn't just scan. And I was so fast, this one lady asked me to slow down because she couldn't see the numbers, they were spinning so fast. I just tried to check them out as fast as I could. And I remember one time the money drawer was off 1 penny, and that was because I found a penny on the floor and I didn't know if it came out of my cash register or not. But it put him off a penny. He didn't know where it came from. So I was pretty good with that. That business went out, and so then I went to the store just kind of one house down, I guess you'd say, and worked there for quite a while. And I have to say, one experience that stands out with that particular one was the teaching that you shouldn't work on Sunday. So I made sure they knew before I took these jobs that I would not work on Sunday. And back then, that was an okay thing, and they listened, or these particular ones did. But one Sunday, one of the cashiers was going to have surgery, another one had a funeral. I mean, we didn't have that many cashiers anyway. And so they were begging me to please come in and help because they had these issues. And I didn't know what to do because I knew that Sunday was the Lord's Day and I should not be working on Sunday. I wanted to help them. I wanted them to know that I cared about them. And so in my heart, I was praying about what to do because I was afraid that if I did it once, it could happen again. And the thought that came to my mind was, go tell your boss that you will work tomorrow, but you won't take any money for it. And so I did, and my boss was like, no way, are you coming in and not getting paid? And I said, well, I won't come in and do it unless, he said, I'll get a bag boy to do it before I'll have you come in and not get paid. But he was a great person. I really cared about him, and he and his wife never had any children. He was so impressed with some of the things that happened. And because I said that, the people around me knew that I was willing to help them and that I cared enough to help them, but I was also not willing to compromise my ideals and my feeling that that's a commandment and I shouldn't break it. And I feel the Lord gave me that answer Anyway, years later, he came to our wedding reception, and he made the comment that if he'd ever had a daughter, he wished that she'd be like me, which I thought was a real compliment coming from him, because he was my boss. After I finished school, I did some of this cashiering for a little while, but I didn't get my teaching certificate because a lot of schools they had said, oh, we need a lot of teachers, and then all of a sudden they have a big influx of teachers, and now they have too many teachers. So I would have had to go another year, or another semester at least, to certify, and I did not want to spend that money and not be able to get a job teaching. And so I went back to cashiering at the grocery store and looking around for something a little more dependable, because in the winter the cashiering sometimes went down a little bit. They had a lot of tourists in the summer, but in the winter it died a little bit. And I had two job opportunities. I applied for dental assistant and at the bank. And the bank was the one that gave me the student loan. So they knew I had the education and everything, and I didn't know if I'd get a job there, but I tried. The problem with the dental assistant was it was a long, I think I probably have to go at least a half hour to 45 minutes to get there. And our roads in the winter were bad, and I didn't really have the best car. So the bank was only about 5 miles from where we were, so it only took me about 15 minutes. However, I heard from the dental assistant who was willing to train me. They were going to train me to be a dental assistant. And then right after I heard from them and said, I'll take it, because I hadn't heard from the bank, I got a call from the bank saying I could have that job. And I really hated to say no, because these people were going to train me and they really wanted me to come, but I knew that the bank was closer and I had an undependable car, and it paid better, had better benefits and all that. So I called and canceled the dental assisting thing and did the bank. And I did that until I got married. The bank split, and I had a nice office that overlooked the lake when they built this separate. First it was Meredith Savings and Trust, and then it turned into Meredith Savings Bank, and Meredith Trust, which was whatever. And I went with the new company over to this big building that sat on the lake. And so I had a nice view of the lake, all these windows while I was working. That was cool. Now, when I went to this bank, my first experience was the very first day I walk in, we have break time. And we went to break, and they had coffee set out for everybody, including me. And I just looked at it and I thought, oh, it's my first day. I don't really want to say much. But I spoke up and I said, you know, I don't drink coffee. And the funny thing is, there were other people there who didn't like coffee. Mine was a word of wisdom thing. Theirs was, I don't like coffee, but somebody put it in front of me, so I'm going to drink it. And this girl said to me, you know what? I've been drinking coffee because they put it there. And she stopped drinking it. By the time I left that job, I heard this one lady say, I'm not ever putting any coffee out anymore. I never know who's going to drink it anymore. So just saying that, it wasn't like I changed how they felt about the gospel or anything, but I helped somebody who was kind of wondering what she should do, because she didn't want to drink it anyway. she didn't like it, and she was drinking it. So it's just an example, I think, of sometimes you don't realize how you're affecting people, and it may not be a testimony builder for somebody, but still they're needing a little bit of confidence that it's okay to say, I don't want this, you know. So I had that experience, and banking was fun. I enjoyed it. I did safety deposit boxes and opened new accounts, and I did typing for the bank officers, and I'm trying to think what else. But before I left, I became a customer service officer. And my bank president, this is an interesting little sideline, he wanted to hire somebody to be the customer service person over people in customer service. And I had been there a long time, and I had the education and everything, but he didn't think I had the temperament to be kind of like a manager would be, where you oversee a group of people. But I was encouraged by one of the loan officers to apply for this job. She had known me for a long time, and she felt like I should get this job. And so I went for it, but then I didn't get it. And he told me, he just didn't feel like I had the right temperament for it. Anyway, so he hired this girl who was younger than me, and I had to train her to do her job, which didn't set very well, obviously, but I took it in stride, and I did my job, and eventually she didn't work out. And my boss, who said I didn't have the temperament for it, decided to hire me for that position anyway. And before I got married, he liked me well enough that he decided to make me a customer service officer, which doesn't happen all the time in a bank. There's only so many officers. And it put me in a different pay range, so that when I got married and moved, if I went into banking, I would have made, better pay scale, whatever. So that worked out okay, because I was handling it okay. I did work for another bank in Berlin, Connecticut, after we got married, as what do you call that? Not public relations. Had to do with employee relations. He was over that, the person that I worked under, and I had to set up the files, and they had just moved in. I had a lot of fun, because every time I was at a bank, they had a grand opening with lots of stuff. And it was really fun, being there for the grand opening and stuff. After that, I had the babies, and I stayed home. After I had kids, I didn't want to work. I wanted to stay home with the kids. So I usually babysat if we needed extra money. But then when Alex went into first grade, when he went into kindergarten, I started this job working for Magazine Place, where I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which was really nice, because it's really dark out when you get up. But you see it get lighter, and I realized something I never realized before, is that there's a period of the morning where you hear a lot of birds chirping, and all of a sudden it goes quiet. Like they're having a devotion or something. I don't know. It's very quiet. And then they pick up again. Or maybe they're eating the worms. I don't know. But it was a different experience. Getting up, I had to be there at 4 o'clock. I would put the magazines up. And the job was okay. I enjoyed putting the magazines up. The only thing I didn't like was they would ship magazines that were questionable. And because you're setting up in a grocery store, you were allowed to make the decision whether or not that magazine was appropriate. And so I got to say whether it was appropriate or not. But I also got to look at it And I did not, I mean, just seeing the cover was like, after a while, I felt like my brain was kind of getting inundated with these images I didn't want to think about or see. And so I quit the job and I became a substitute teacher about the time Alex went into first grade. And from that point on, while the kids were in school, I was either a substitute teacher. Sometimes they hired me for a month or two at a time. There was a year where I was a full-time sub, and that was unusual because I didn't have my teaching certificate. But they did like the way I handled the class, and so they offered me a full-time position, which was not very often that they did that. I did work for church facilities management in Concord. They desperately needed somebody to come in and do it, and my husband knew this person needed it, and he said, well, my wife's substituting, but she used to do stuff for the bank. She could probably do this. And so I ended up working for them for a year or two, I don't know. And then they went to Vermont. But I had to quit because my back was killing me. I didn't take the breaks I should have and gotten some exercise. I would just sit there. There was so much work to do. It was kind of just my boss and me, and I was constantly working, and I didn't get up, and I think it hurt my back to not have that exercise, so I finally had to leave. But anyway, I substitute taught, though, for about 15 years altogether, even though some of that was full-time. And the last little part, I was working as a teaching assistant down the street from our house at Rumford Elementary, and left that when we moved out west because all our kids are moving out west. And that's another story. And I finished up substituting. I really haven't done much since substituting.
Really?
I like substituting. I like teaching. And if I had to do school over again, I would have done elementary ed, except that I would have had to have math. So I don't know if I could have. But I love teaching. It's so much fun to be with the kids and to do the crafty little things and the teaching things. I enjoy that more than the banking thing. Oh, I had a weird experience when I was at a cashier. Oh my goodness. He used to post our schedule out by the phone. It was a pay phone, so the public could use the pay phone and see our schedule, and some of our information was on there. And I got a birthday card in the mail from this married person. And I thought, this is just really weird. And then he came in one day and he said that he and his wife were breaking up and he wanted to get to know me better. And I immediately, after he left, went and talked to this nice boss and said, this guy got my address and information off this thing you have posted by the phone. And so he immediately put it in the back. And after that, whenever this guy would come in, he'd immediately send me out back. He wouldn't let me be on the cash register because this guy was really kind of interesting. And really, guess, try to shoot his wife later. I don't know, but it was weird. And you get the vibes, We lived in New Hampshire, and there weren't a lot of people around to meet, and I was now 20-something. So I was looking for a return missionary because I wanted to marry a return missionary. And they had a young adult conference that was coming up, and we used to go to those because that's where you meet some more different guys, And we went down. I was in Hartford, Connecticut, and I remember I went with Sherry. And Sherry and I were driving down saying, even if we meet somebody who is going to come to New Hampshire to take us out, So we get down there and we're walking by a room and Sherry said, oh, what about that guy? And I looked back, and I said, well, maybe for you, but not for me. And it happened to be your dad. And he knows the story. So anyway, that night they had a dance, and they were having a sock contest. And there were some adorable socks. People really went all out to make they put a lot of work into these socks they were wearing. You know, they were squirrel socks and who knows what else. But they made their socks. But the guy who won had striped toe socks that he bought from a store. And the only reason he won was because he was from Hartford and he got the most applause, which is how they judged. And so I wasn't wearing my glasses for vanity reasons. And I couldn't see who this person was up there that won. And come to find out, I'm dancing with this guy, right? And we're chit-chatting. I'm trying to find something to talk about. And all I can think of is, this guy won. And all he did was buy his socks. And so I'm saying this to him, and he says, yeah, and I'm the guy who bought the socks. So that was pretty embarrassing. But it didn't really put him off. He wanted my address. And I kept putting him off because he did not look like a return missionary, and I wanted a return missionary. I had no interest in developing any kind of relationship with anybody. But I had another freaky thing happen that night. I danced with this other guy, and he wanted me to go into this other room so he could play his guitar and sing a song for me. And I'm thinking, this is my night. And I go in and I'm listening, and he's singing, and I'm thinking, I'm never going to get back to the dance. Finally, I just said, I came to dance. I really want to go back to the dance. And I don't really know what happened to this other guy. But the next day, Walter wanted to get my address. And I put him off that night. And then the next day, we had a fast meeting. It was the end of the conference, and you have your meeting, and everybody's all up. And so I got up and I bore my testimony. And after church closed, my friend was disappointed in herself because she said she had wanted to get up and bear her testimony, but she didn't have enough courage to do it. And so she was crying, and we were talking and stuff. And in the background, Walter's kind of pacing around, waiting for us to leave so he can get my address. Finally, he gave up and went out and got somebody else's address. And he forgot his scriptures, though. So he came back in to get his scriptures where he hung his coat. And then he ran into me again and got my address. And then I went outside, had another strange experience. Not with him. He got my address. He left. I went out and I was talking with the girls. And this guy comes up and he looks me in the face and he says, "What beautiful eyes you have." And I'm thinking, where are these people coming from? It was a strange weekend. And I was hoping in a way, because Walter had longer hair and I knew he wasn't a return missionary, I just was not interested. So I didn't care if he called me, but he did. And he visited a couple weeks later, and then he visited some more. And about, I don't know, every other week he came up and visited. And anyway, it progressed to the point that at New Year's Eve, there was a New Year's Eve dance, and everybody was wrapping the twirly stuff around us and everything and whatever. I was having a good time. He was a nice guy. I just not a return missionary. And so, but along about, he had joined the church, but he had only been a member about a year. And you could kind of tell when you talked. And along about March, he proposed, and I accepted. And then we had a breakup. And I won't go into the reasons why. But part of it, again, was that I wanted to return missionary and wanted somebody solid in the gospel and didn't feel that that was the way it was. So he went back, and unbeknownst to me, he had just had his patriarchal blessing just before he met me. And I did not know that in that patriarchal blessing, it had said to go on a mission, that it would be his foundation, kind of his, but that he would feel like time was passing him by, but that the Lord would raise up someone who would be loyal to him. And, but, you know, he was 25 or 6 at this time, and he wasn't really wanting to go on a mission. But anyways, bottom line is we broke up. I had already sent my stuff down. So I sent my dad down. He got all my stuff. I returned the ring. And then Walter moved to New Hampshire. He stuck it out, and he stuck like, I'm not giving up. And so he talked about it, and he shared his patriarchal blessing, and then he went on a mission. And I was engaged still. He gave me the ring back because he wanted me to be engaged when he left. And he looked so much more like a missionary, you know, his haircut and everything. It's funny, he cut his hair once, and they made him go back and cut it again because it wasn't quite short enough. But even when he got out there, it was cut even shorter. Then he looked like a missionary, you know. It was one interesting note here. He was working, and his mail was coming to our house. No, it wasn't coming to our house. This guy at church lived near someone that he had lived with for a while, and his mail was coming there. And he was the custodian at church, and I went to do tithing receipts, and he handed me this envelope that was Walter's mission call. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm holding the mission call in my hand before he is, you know. And that night I dreamt that when it was opened up, I saw Florida in a big word, Florida. And I thought, whoa, Florida? Well, anyway, the next day he opens it up and it says he's going to Austria. I'm thinking, wow, I'm way off the beam here, you know. Well, he went out on his mission and had a really hard time with German. And it got to the point where he was either going to come home or go English speaking. And he decided to go English speaking. And somewhere it's recorded, because he wrote to me and told me this, that when they were talking about whether he should go English speaking or not, he asked, where do you think they'll send me? And they said, well, typically from here they probably send you to Florida. And I'm like, and all of a sudden he says, not Florida. And I don't think it was because of me so much as he had a lot of relatives in Florida. But anyway, they said, well, that's fine. So they sent him to Texas, and I figured that's close enough. So that's our little story about his mission call. But I think it was meant to be that he had this calling to Austria because it was exciting to get ready to go on this mission. He was going to go to another country. He's going to learn another language, which happens to be what his ancestors spoke. Some of them were German speaking and German. So that was a really interesting time. Then we got married. Well, his mission president let him come home a couple weeks early because by the time he came home, he was 30, and he really wanted to get married before Christmas, and he wasn't going to come home until after Christmas, like 2 days after Christmas. And so they let him come home around Thanksgiving. I don't know if it was right after Thanksgiving. And so 2 weeks later, we got married in the Washington, D.C. temple, and that started our whole journey. That's how we met. Some of the things I really admire about Walter are that he reads the scriptures every day and makes sure we have prayer. Prayer and scripture was regular in our home. I don't remember ever a day missing unless he was sick or something. I admired that. He made sure I did the family home meeting a lot, but I know that he was the one that he made sure that we had it on a regular basis. Oh, he's a hard worker. Oh my goodness. If you want something cleaned, he is the most thorough cleaner I have ever seen, to the point, it's like, will we ever get this done? Kind of. He is really good. If you want something thoroughly cleaned, he cleans it. And he's had a lot of jobs, but I don't remember a time where he wasn't out there hitting the pavement trying to get something for work. And trying to sustain the family, even if it was a temporary job. And so he's had a lot of different experiences with his jobs. He loved playing with the kids. I remember being really tired during the week, and he would take the kids on a Saturday afternoon after he'd worked all week. He'd take them and give me a day or half a day to relax a little bit, because I'd had the kids. And because he worked in sales a lot, he really wasn't home during the week to really give me a lot of support. By the time he got home sometimes and had his supper, they were probably in bed or getting close to being in bed, so it wasn't like he could really do too much that way. I do remember that whenever I had the babies, if that baby cried, I did not have to get up out of bed to get the baby. He would get up, get the baby, and bring the baby to me, so that I wouldn't have to get out of bed. I could rest. And that was kind of, I don't know too many guys that would do that. He was so sweet that way. And if I was sick or something, he was very thoughtful. I always felt like he was very attentive as far as trying to take care of me, especially if I wasn't feeling well. He's poetic. He's very fun-loving. He has this bubbly personality, and it brings it out in his patriarchal blessing that he jumped for joy when he found out that he was going to come to earth. And I just think that's his personality. He is that way. Smiles a lot, likes to make it funny, He's active. He likes to walk and bike ride, and he loves nature. Takes after his mother when it comes to nature. If there's a beautiful sky out there, he wants to stop and look at it for a while. I'm the one that wants to, let's move on. I got things I got to do. But he loves looking at that sky or that ocean. He loves the ocean. He's very friendly. He can talk to just about anybody, and he can bring up the gospel in very unusual ways. But it's not something I could do. My dad could do that, but I couldn't. If I did it, it would come out weird. He's, I think, been a real asset in the gospel. I know he's put a lot of effort into his testimony and has had a lot of questions. His patriarchal blessing points out that he has a lot of things in his mind, going. But I think Heavenly Father really loves him for those qualities, for trying so hard, even when he feels sometimes a little bit questioning, he wants to do the right thing. So, anyway, those are things I like about him. Jonathan was our first son, and we named him Jonathan because, well, Dad's father was Walter John. I had a cousin that I really liked who was very sweet. His name was John, but also because Dad had this thing for Jonathan Livingston Seagull thing that he had seen that it inspired him. He felt that it was uplifting, and so he really liked the name Jonathan. So we named him Jonathan Walter, and we didn't want to go Walter Jonathan because that mixes things up at the bank. so he became Jonathan. And Jonathan, he was very loving, very, very smart. And when it came, he'll hate this one. He was the easiest one to potty train. He woke up one morning dry. We rushed him in. As soon as he knew what he was supposed to do, that was it. He never had a wet diaper again or anything. Once he knew, he was very intelligent. Anyway, very intelligent. Loved to do computers and stuff from an early age, and still, I really think he was sent to Earth to do what he's doing. I think somewhere along the line he is going to do something with that knowledge, and in a way that's Heavenly Father's using him. And even on his mission, he was used mostly for computer. It frustrated him when he went on his mission because he was in the office all the time doing computer. But they needed him, and they did give him some time, and he could tell you this. But anyway, he was very dedicated. I remember Jonathan did a couple of things to me. One day when he was little, I would say he was about 5 years old, he came out and he said, "Mom, I know where I'm going on my mission." And I'm thinking, really? And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to Bethlehem." I'm like, Bethlehem? And then he went back in the other room, and then he came back and he said, "Mom, I could die on my mission." I'm thinking, what are you doing to me? So when he did go on a mission to Argentina, I thought, okay, what's going to happen here? But he came home safely. Now, I have a thought about this. Perhaps the mission he's talking about, perhaps, is still in the future. That gives me a lot of comfort. I don't know. But anyway, he was a very intelligent little person. He had all these little ideas going on in his head. And one experience that I have to share that shows what kind of person he is even with his family, he was always like little brothers and stuff, always hugging him. I've got a lot of pictures of him hugging Justin. And one day Justin pulled I think it was a boombox type thing that he had off, and it broke. It smashed on the floor. And Jonathan just kind of stood there, and he was like, you could tell he was not happy. And he ran in his bedroom. And he came out a few minutes later, and he gave Justin a hug, and he said, "You're more important to me than that boombox." And I just thought, wow, this is a young child telling his brother something really important. And so that's Jonathan. Let me just mention one more thing that came to my mind about Jonathan. Remember, he was into this computer stuff. His bedroom looked like a bunch of wires because he would collect all this computer stuff and try to make computers when he got in, I don't know, probably high school. Middle school, actually. He started middle school. And so that's kind of an interesting side note for his talent, right from the beginning. And our very first computer cost us $600. For us, that was a lot of money. And he wanted to take it apart for his school project. They had to present something and follow through and do it. he wanted to take it apart and put it back together in front of the class and explain how to do it. And we're like, I don't think so. We just bought this computer. But he knew somebody at church who said it was okay. I'll help him take it apart and put it back together again. So then we're like, well, how can we say no? This guy is supporting him, right? So what happened was he gets close to the time where it's time to do this project. And the guy doesn't have time to help him take it apart. He says, Mom, I got to take it apart because tomorrow I have to put it back together again. But that's okay. He said he'll help me put it back together again. Well, the guy wasn't able to come back. Anyways, it worked. But that was our first experience with his computer thing. And the second experience was this in high school, and he could tell you this, but this is his focus, his talent that came out in his whole mix here. He went to the store around the corner, which was a computer repair place, and said, "Can I work for you?" And they said, "Oh, we don't want to hire anybody. We don't need anybody else." He says, "What if I work for you for 2 weeks free?" Or it was either 1 or 2 weeks free. "And if I don't prove that I'm worth it, then you don't hire me." So they said, well, what the heck, you know? So he comes and they end up hiring him because he's really good. In fact, one day he came in and they said, "Don't even bother with that one. We've all looked at it. Nobody can fix that one." And John said, "Now I've got to try. You got to let me try." So he has to go, "Yeah, fine, whatever." And he found out that 2 programs weren't compatible, and that's why it wasn't working. So he solved that problem for them. Anyway, that's just the real focus of John's talent, I think, coming out. And I think he came to Earth for a reason with that specific talent. On to Justin. Justin's very talented. He was a smiley, happy baby. I just remember him smiling a lot. It reminds me a little bit of Everett, kind of. Did well in school, and in 7th or 8th grade, all of a sudden we found out that he'd won some award in the Boston Globe Art Awards, and we didn't even know he had any art talent. And he came home with this artwork, and he said, "Mom, that's not even my best work. If I'd known they were going to do this, I would have worked harder on it." So, here's some advice to people out there. You never know what people are going to do with what you're doing. So maybe you should give it your best right from the beginning. But he ended up getting, I think, a gold and a silver award. And the gold is like the highest in the Boston Globe Art Awards. And that was good. So he does have a real talent for landscapes, I think, and animals. He says he's not crazy about doing people. And with his photography, I think, has developed so that he has a real skill with that. And he liked to do physical stuff. I remember he did snowboarding. Now, he taught himself this snowboarding. I think he could teach himself just about anything he put his mind to. He did a little bit of soccer. And the other experience that stands out in my mind with Justin is when we moved back from Utah to Connecticut, he was going to school and they said he was flunking 2 things. Justin had never flunked anything, never gotten a bad report card, anything. So I talked to the school and they said, well, it's because they were, I don't know if they were, one was a strictly oral French and the other one was strictly written, and I don't know if which one, Utah or whatever, but that was a problem for him transitioning. The other was some kind of geography thing. The teacher had a big project going on and she thought he should have caught up to where the other kids were, even though he'd been gone. And we only had like 2 weeks before that ended. She wanted him to have everything done that they had, and she was flunking him. And one example of we thought was a little extreme was before we went on vacation, she wanted him to look up the name of this Dutch silversmith. We got this name. We didn't have computer back then. And we went to the library, the local library, because school was closed when he got that name. He was supposed to do it over vacation. And we were going to go to New Hampshire for vacation. So we went right to the library and we talked to the librarian, and she could only find like one paragraph about this Dutch silversmith. And so I said, you know what, this is going to have to be it because we're leaving. And if you can't find anything else in this library to support what she wants, then that's what it has to be. So he went back, and the teacher, she said, this is not sufficient. And when I talked to her, she said, well, you should have gone to another library. And I'm thinking, if your child can't get the information from their own local library, what about the child whose parents don't support them at all? Where are they supposed to get this information? And anyway, they didn't seem like they were working very well, trying, because I didn't want him to flunk. He'd never flunked in his life. He'd always gotten A's. And so I had a friend who was a homeschooler, and she told me what to do. They were coming up to a vacation. She said, you give him notice the day he leaves, because he'll be gone for like, I don't know if it's 2 weeks, but you have to give him 10 days notice, and he never goes back. You give him that notice. And we happened to know the superintendent of schools who knew the Belinsky family because he dated one of them. And he knew they were all educated. So it wasn't a problem with him, and we took him out. And so I homeschooled him from that time until we moved to New Hampshire, which was only maybe a month. And when we got to New Hampshire, I said to him, do you want to try going back to school now, or do you want to continue homeschooling? And in the mix of all this, we were praying before we took him out of school. We didn't want to make it easy for him, as he might have other things he has to solve, but we were praying to know what to do because we'd never had any issues with him. His grades were always good. He never got any complaints about behavior. And I had a dream, and I dreamt that he was trying to do work and people kept piling stuff on it, and I knew he was never going to be able to do it. And it kind of tipped the scales for us, and we felt that it wasn't worth ruining him. If he hadn't had a perfect, several schools, not just one, then we might have been a little bit more whatever. But we felt he deserved to have that chance and to be supported because he hadn't had any bad. So anyway, we got back to New Hampshire, and he decided he wanted to go back in. He went back in, finished high school, no problem. Never had a problem after that. Grades were always up there, and he worked hard. So I'm glad that we did that. So that was Justin. He was a good worker and talented and, liked to do sports and stuff. And he was a joy, He was in college, working full time, and he was in the National Guard. And he managed to do all those and earn, like I don't know if it was high honors, but he got honors and stuff, and I don't know how he did it. Ashley was very sweet, very helpful, even from a little girl. Ashley, I always felt like Ashley was a little butterfly. When I would cuddle her sometimes, it was like I wasn't sure if she would stay there. It's like that little butterfly, if you move too much, they fly away. And so I always felt a little bit breathless because I wanted her to stay there. I wanted to hug her and, not pull away. She's had a natural ability to teach herself some piano because we didn't have the money to do that, which Jonathan, by the way, had too. very creative. She did some of the most creative, fun little things for me for Mother's Day, which shows how sweet she was. And she would help me around the house and stuff when I was working. And I actually paid her a little bit sometimes for helping, because it enabled me to work and make some extra money, but also her too. And I knew she had work too, just trying to get schoolwork done. And I felt that the kids' work was school. They were there most of the day. It's like work. And when they came home, I didn't want them to feel like they had to work some more. So if she worked, it was because she didn't have a test or she felt like she could handle it. So anyway, very sweet, very talented, and just all around good kid. A lot of people, I heard a lot of other mothers, I wouldn't say a lot of, but I had a couple of mothers say to me, I want that one for a daughter-in-law. So she's that good, you know. I don't know, she was just very organized, kept her room clean, just really sweet. I do remember one time having a dream. It was before she was supposed to go on a long field trip. And in the dream, it was like she disappeared. And I was trying to find her, and I found her in this long room where there were beds. And it scared me because I was afraid she might disappear on this trip, which may or may not. But because I was so worried about it, she stayed home. I told her about it. I said, I don't know if it means anything, but if this trip doesn't really mean that much to you, it'd mean a lot to me if you stayed home, so I wouldn't worry. So she stayed home, which I thought was really sweet. Adam was very talented too, and very smart. You were all smart. I don't think any of you were way smarter than I was. They were all smarter than me. He loved sports. I remember him doing baseball especially, maybe a little wrestling. I don't remember having anybody ever call me. He became valedictorian. And I could say more about that. A lot of people were excited about the fact that he was valedictorian. And he stood up and I think tried to share his testimony instead of giving his talk. And that didn't go over very well with the school. I remember us being blackballed for it. We went there one day and they wouldn't even talk to him. They wouldn't acknowledge that he was in front of us. And they wouldn't talk to me either. I said once to one of the teachers, did I do something wrong? And she said, absolutely not. And after that, people started talking to me again. The thing they don't understand is that when you grow up in the church, they assign you talks and stuff, and you are allowed, nobody stands over you and censors what you're going to say. You are allowed to take that where the Spirit leads you and where you feel comfortable. And they do not understand that, and I think partly because in a public setting, they want to know exactly what you're going to say, you know. So it was interesting. But I give him a lot of credit for his testimony and his strength to do that. And I knew it was his testimony that made him do that. Adam liked to go running. And a lot of times he wanted to go running at night. And I said to him, I don't think you should go running at night. I don't think it's a good idea. because people don't know what you're running from. He was a good kid and he was doing the right thing and everybody might vouch for him, but if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's not a good thing. So he did kind of listen, and I don't know, I know he told me about an experience where he went running, and I don't know if he had someone with him when this happened, but two guys started pursuing him, and he was scared. He could tell you better, because I wasn't there, but I heard about it later. And I think he realized then you really do need someone, and maybe nighttime isn't the best time to go running, but he said he ran all over Concord because he didn't want these guys to know where we lived. And so he made some kind of big loop before he finally got home. And you just have to be careful what you do. And that, I kind of remember that experience from him. He pretty much prepared to go on his mission right after. So I think he was ready. I think he was really planning for it. I remember when he was younger, he got this thing on his leg that looked like it could be a very fast-growing cancer, and we did not have any money to go to the doctors. We did not have insurance, and so Dad gave him a blessing, and I don't know if I felt inspired to, but I put vitamin E oil on it, and the next day it was gone, and it never returned. But it was there. I mean, one day there was nothing on his leg, and the next day it was probably the size of my pinky. So that was kind of a really fast-moving something. I know he's involved in a lot of things, and singing and stuff. In fact, all the boys like to sing and dance and whatever, and the girls are shy. Ashley's a little bit shy, and I'm a little bit shy, and we're not out there performing so much, but the guys all seem to enjoy it. I think they got that from their dad. I have a reason why I think Alex was a little wired when he was younger. I had a craving for hot red pepper when I was pregnant for him. And I like to say that when he was born, he was my firecracker, and I shouldn't have eaten so much hot pepper because he liked to cry all the time. And then we got a little bit older. He is a little feisty. He was a good kid. I loved him. He'd come over. He'd be like a little puppy, come over, lay his head on my knee and want me to scratch his back. And we had a good relationship that way. But he could get very angry sometimes. But he got to a point in his life where he didn't know what he wanted, and I felt that he needed to know that there was a God and that he had a mission for him, a special mission, and that he needed to find out if there was a God so he could redirect his life at this time. And he and his friend challenged each other to read the Book of Mormon that summer. And there had been a little bit of an issue about what classroom he wanted to be in at the beginning of the school year. But by the end, he had changed his mind and didn't matter where he told me it was okay if he went in a different cluster, they called it. And he's never been the same since. He's been really focused and talented and went on a mission, and he's got some really good talents. Beautiful family now. But I do think people need to understand that sometimes when they're younger, they're not who they're going to be. Because I know, and this is just an aside, Sister Smolnick once said her parents called her the evil child. They thought she was evil because of her behavior when she was younger. And if you know Sister Smolnick, do you remember Sister Smolnick? her son played the piano beautifully. She's a sweet little school teacher lady now. You would never know that she could have been called the evil child when she was growing up. So I think people need to know that when children are younger and their behavior might make you think it'll never be different, it can be, and it might be. So, you know. I love being a mom. Just, with all the challenges and everything, I loved being a mom. I loved my children. And I don't feel like I was always the best mom in the world, but I wanted to be, and I wanted them to succeed and be better than me. And I am more interested in them being successful in the gospel and committed to the gospel than any other success they could have. And I've just been really blessed that they have gone on missions. And I'll say this, as I was having children, people who weren't members of the church said, how can you ever take care of these children you're having? You've got college, you've got whatever, and we had missions besides that, and we didn't know how that was all going to happen, and that's something I'll talk about later, but it happens, and I've just been blessed that they have gone on missions, and all my kids have gone to college, and I'm just grateful that they were able to do that. If I had to do it over again, it's really hard when you're in the throes of being a mother because you have to factor in being pregnant and trying to take care of children, which is it's really hard because it's draining on you. But all in all, if I had to do it over again, I would stress less about, and I don't know that I stress that much about the house, but I like the house to be clean. I took a lot of that on myself because I knew that you guys worked hard at school and homework and activities, and it's like, when do you have time to clean when you come home? We did have time, and this was look for things out there that will help you be a better mother. Like I found bright music. I love bright music. I liked what it taught, and you guys listened to it when you were younger. I like the idea that when you came home, I didn't bug you about homework right off, but when you did do homework, I'd say, just do 15 minutes, because I knew once you got into it, you'd do it. It was just starting it, getting into it. It was like really dragged on you. And you would do it. You guys would do it. I don't remember a time when I really had to bug anybody about homework, except for that one little period of time. And you managed to get your grades up, But for the most part, everybody did their own thing, and they did it themselves. I don't remember, But so I guess if I had to give advice, it was stress less about the house, have more fun with your kids. And people say this all the time because they don't remember the house that much. If it was a total disaster, maybe they would remember it. But if it's kept somewhat normal, and I think there's ways to organize it so you don't have a total mess. If I had my perfect house, it would be a house with the washer right beside the shower, the bathroom, and all the clothes and bureaus would be around the room, and you would come in there to get dressed and to put your dirty clothes, whatever. It would never leave the room. It would never hit the floor. That's my ideal. But I think no toys in the bedroom is a good thing, because I've heard that going to sleep at night, the better, it's more peaceful, more calm if it's not chaotic. And so as you guys were growing up, I try to make sure it wasn't too bad. But when you got to be teenagers, it was like, I heard this about teenagers. just shut the door and forget they live there because it's not worth the fight or the whatever argument. And every now and then I would try to encourage it. And if it didn't happen and I felt like it was strong enough to say, well, this is what I really want. So if I really want it, maybe I should go do it. Because obviously it doesn't bother them. But none of you, it seemed like none of you suffered from that too much. I think that you're all hard workers. I think I taught enough of the work thing that you're all hard workers. What I wanted you to get was that work can be fun, and find something that you enjoy doing and do it. And I think a lot of you have done that. That's what your careers are, you know, doing something that you really like to do. Love them more than anything. Lots of hugs and kisses. I've had people say that you can spoil them that way, but I don't believe it. I think hugs and kisses make kids feel really secure, but I don't mean spoil them. I mean hugs and kisses. I had somebody once tell me that I kissed my babies more than anybody they had ever seen, and I don't know if they were disgusted by it, but I just loved the smell and those puffy little cheeks, and I had to kiss them. So, anyway, I don't know. There's lots of things. But if you're having a problem with a child, I would say pray about it, and the Spirit will tell you something that you can do, that you can try to do and see if it works. Because usually it will if you hear something. I remember once Justin got really upset, and he said, I'm going to run away from home. And I was worried about that. I mean, he wasn't super old, so it would be he's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 maybe. And I worried about it. And so I prayed about it, because every time he got mad, he'd throw that out, and he knew it bugged me. I think as a child, they intuitively know what will get to mom. And I didn't know how to handle it, and it was really bothering me. And I prayed about it, and the thought that came to my mind was to tell him that if he ever felt like running away, to tell me. And I would talk to Dad, and I would go someplace else so that he could stay and be safe, because I didn't want him to not be safe. And he started crying, and John heard what I said and came in and, I don't want you to leave. But I never heard that from Justin ever again after that. He stopped. And I said, I'm not going to leave. But I want Justin to know that he had a place to be safe if he couldn't, Anyway. But anyway, I think the Spirit, I don't want him to feel anxious about me leaving, because I would never do that. But if he needed some space, I felt he needed some space where he was safe. I wanted work to be fun. That was one thing I got from Bright. I didn't ever want you to feel, and so we would try to make a game out of it. If we had to weed the garden, we'd try to make a game out of it. And some people thought I was a terrible parent for just not saying, do it. But I didn't care. I figure if I can get my children to do it in a positive frame of mind anyhow, if it takes a little incentive, why not? I would not go to work if somebody didn't give me money, And so if I'm having you work, I thought it'd be fun. And I think it was more fun than just constantly badgering somebody to finish doing something. And I think love is the most important thing as far as it goes with kids. I've heard that you can make mistakes with your children, but if they feel loved, also if it's justified, they'll forget it. But even if you make mistakes, if they know they're loved, it kind of gets you through that. They have to know that. I think it's the most important thing when you raise a child, that they need to know they're loved, and they'll flourish if they feel loved enough. When you kids were growing up, every time I turned around when I felt like I needed some new knowledge, it came. I got information when Dad was going to school about raising kids. They had a lady come who had taught first grade for 30 years, and I had kids who were going to start school. And she said some very profound things that influenced what we did with you kids. One of them was that if you have a late birthday and you're a boy, you probably won't do as well. You could do it. Some kids could do as well, she said, but when they hit high school, they're at a disadvantage because emotionally they're not where their peers, they're younger than their peers. And she said it's better for them to go into high school emotionally more mature than their peers. And so John had a late birthday. He was a November 1st birthday. And that affected, he was very smart. We knew he was ready, but because of what she said, we said no. We didn't do anything where I think we were in Utah and they didn't let kids go that late. But when we moved to Connecticut, they said we have 3 choices. You can do pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, or pre-first grade. And we were like, well, he's probably ready for pre-first grade, but no. He was ready for something, so we decided he could go to pre-kindergarten and then go regular kindergarten, and he would be ahead of the game because we kept him, not kept him back a year, but we didn't enroll him until he was 6. You know, other kids would have been, well, he was 5 going on 6, you know, really close to 6. And he did really well. And the other thing she said was, people push their kids too much to be this fantastic, bright child, this, you know. And she said, what happens to a bright child sometimes is they get things done because they're so good at it, then people give them more to do. And after a while, they understand that they're working harder than other kids. They're having to do more than other kids, so they quit. They don't do it anymore because they don't want more work. And she said there are other ways to help that child, like maybe ask them to help a child that's having a hard time with the work. But she said giving them more work is frustrating. And the other thing was, when you send your child to school, she said, I don't care if they know their ABCs and their 1, 2, 3s, because if they have the capacity, they'll learn it really quickly at that age. She said, the thing you need to teach your child is to respond the first time you call them. Because she has 30 kids, and she said, I cannot repeat myself 30 times or more because they weren't listening or they weren't coming. Her job is a lot easier if you train them to, like if you say, come to supper, then there needs to be a reason or something that helps them to know that if they don't come right now, there's a consequence. Because it's teaching them not to respond when you don't. Anyway, she taught that, and then we had another lady come who was Mother of the Year. Her name was Claudia Black. She was Mother of the Year in California and Mother of the Year in Utah. And she had so many ideas that just kind of overwhelmed us. And she had different things. She did Scripture of the Week. She did Animal of the Week. She had a calendar that every day, I think she homeschooled, but every day she had something going on, and there might be a little box on there and you open it up and say, oh, we get to go to the park today. Or it's Orville Wright and whatever's, they learned to fly, and she'd have her kids make airplanes and go out and fly them off the deck. And I mean, she incorporated a lot of fun stuff into her teaching. And she'd do Country of the Month, and they would make paper bag costumes to go with the country and food and all that. So I picked up a lot of stuff that I didn't use all the time because it just seems like you just don't have the time. But I did incorporate some of those things, and I think it was helpful and fun, made things a little more fun at times. And, you know, bright music. The thing with some of this stuff is like bright music, I couldn't afford it, so I sold it. I also, at one point, wanted Tupperware, but I couldn't afford it, so I sold it for a while. And I only sold it until I got what I wanted. I also sold some kind of Christmas catalog stuff once because we didn't have enough money to get Christmas presents. And I got Christmas presents for all you kids because I sold it that year. So I just think that when you have a need or you want something, you can earn it in different ways. You might not earn the money the same way as other people. We moved out west to start a business with this guy that Dad felt like he met at BYU. And he felt like he was the brother he never had. And so he really liked him. But before we moved, I started having weird dreams. And when I walked, well, for a while we stayed in a campground while they were trying to get things going and stuff. And we walked into his house. And as soon as I walked in, I said to Dad, "This is not good. This is the place that I dreamt about." And the dream was not a positive dream. It was kind of a foreboding feeling. And he said, "You can't possibly know these people. You can't possibly know this is not a good place." You know, and I said, "I don't know. I'm just telling you, I had this dream and this feels like it's not a good place." And they were members of the church. He wanted to start this business where they did some kind of media, magazine. Now you don't need it because you can go online and find out everything you want to know usually. But one of the things that happened that came to light while I think we were meant to live there with them for a while. They invited us to live there until the financing came through because we were camping out. And we had a couple of windstorms that felt like it was going to take our tent right out of the park, you know. So they invited us to live with them for a while. And I think that it was good because we wouldn't have known some of the things we ended up finding out. One, we found out that he had forged something at one professor's name on a drop card. He wanted to drop a class and he couldn't get hold of the guy, so he just forged it and put it through. So he got kicked out of BYU, which we found out about. And he was telling us all these stories, like there was some place down in Utah where he found this, somebody down there found this sort of Laban and some records. And that he had seen these records and was able to translate something off them. So that was kind of interesting. He said he knew where the 10 tribes were and that the leader was really wicked and the people needed to be rescued. And a friend of his down in Arizona was building some kind of UFO or something to get there. And he was borrowing this friend's truck because he went by a name and his wife went by a name, but I found out later that her name was something else probably. And he said they were using different names because her husband was in the mafia in Alaska. And she had like 6 or 7 kids, but she ran away because he was so bad. And she had a 6-month-old baby, and we're like, she left her 6 months. But she said, "I knew he was okay with the kids. He just wasn't okay with me, and I needed to get away." Well, while we were there, and that's why they changed their name, so the husband couldn't find her, or one of the reasons. Then, while we're there, one of her one of these, a child shows up that's like in her teenage years, and we were told she was a niece visiting from somewhere. It turned out that it was her daughter who had run away from the mafia dad, and she was using a name that whatever. And so while she was there, we slept upstairs and they were downstairs, and we could hear this constant barrage of talking while this girl was living there. And she came up one time and she said, "You guys are all right, but he's weird." And finally, she couldn't take it anymore, and she made it known she wanted to go back to Alaska. So the FBI came and interviewed everybody in the house, including Dad and I. Did we know any, what did we know about this? Because they want to make sure she wasn't kidnapped and all that. And we told her, and when she left, she did tell us again. She said, "I like you guys, but I can't take John. I can't take this person anymore." That wasn't his real name, but that's what he went by. So, and one time I went down to do laundry, and he was standing there, and he said, You and Walter are spiritual infants compared to he and his wife." And I'm thinking, okay, that's fine with me. And I thought, and he said, "We live the law of Abraham." And I'm thinking, Christ was born. Why are we living the law of Abraham still? I didn't say that to him, but I'm thinking in my mind some scenarios. And it got to the point where they were waiting for some stuff, some financial stuff to happen. And this person felt that it's going to happen, very positive, this is going to happen. And Dad was praying that the Lord's will would happen. And it got to the point that when Dad walked into the room, this person raised his hand and cast Satan out. And all because he was praying that the Lord's will would be done. He felt that he knew the Lord's will and that this is what's supposed to happen, and he didn't have to pray for the Lord's will anymore because he knew what it was. She came up one day and she had finger marks on her, bruise on her hand, on her wrist. And so I'm like, I don't know how anybody could get that on them how can he be righteous? How can he be, and so in my mind, all the things that I had dreamt and everything, I felt like and I was very frustrated because Dad had wanted this connection. He wanted to have this connection. He felt like he was a brother. They could communicate. But towards the end, Dad was starting to see that this is kind of not whatever. I didn't have anything to go on before, but then this happened. And he said, somebody we know has maps to the gold bunkers from the Philippines, and he wanted Dad to become an expert in bringing that gold over. And I said to Dad, a little bit out of your field, but even if you could do this, wouldn't everybody in the world be after this gold? I don't think this is a very safe activity. And he was beginning to feel a little bit like, right. We finally, Dad talked to the bishop, and the bishop, this didn't break up yet, okay? I told him finally, I said, look, let's just get a job. So he worked going around reading meters while he was in Salt Lake because we were living off credit until, they got their job, and I'm thinking, well, this is the other thing. There were some people in the ward, members of bishoprics or something, who did not like him, and they died. And he said, this guy said, the Lord took them out because they were opposing me. And then there was this other lady who had helped them, and they had said they would give her the money back within a certain length of time, and they didn't. She got sick, and then they went and took care of her. But in the meantime, I'd heard things like, we've studied all these things. We know which things are poisonous and this and that. I'm thinking, what in the heck are they telling me this for? Well, anyway, they wanted Dad to do the gold thing. Well, we moved to Provo. We wanted to get into just any place, but he knew this guy who, this is where the Hummer thing came in, okay? We knew this guy who was trying, he would go around and plan it like everything's going to happen. And he went to this place, this Hummer place, because he was going to build a complex. We were all going to live in this complex. And it was going to be like a fortress kind of thing. And we're going to use Hummers. And so he went to this place and, was talking to them about how many Hummers he wanted to buy. And these salesmen are like, oh, this guy wants to buy Hummers. We went into this house in Provo that they were going to buy for the business that was like 15,000 square feet inside. I mean, you could fit probably 4 of our houses or more in this whole house, but that was what they were going to have. They're going to have this. And anyway, this Dad and I just finally we got to the point where we wanted to just move out, right? And I was kind of pushing for it. And, but John, he was okay with that, but he wanted us to buy this guy's house that he had been working with. This guy thought that John's business was going to buy a lot of stuff from him. Now, I don't remember what it wasn't the Hummers, it was something else. And he had taken that bonus money that he thought he was going to get and redone his whole kitchen. And I think John felt like this guy decided he needed to move because he couldn't afford it, because things weren't moving along fast enough. And John wanted to make it easy, and he wanted us to move into it. So we move into this nice big house in Orem. Or was it Provo? Dad knows where it is. Beautiful music room. I got pictures because we lived there. We didn't have a dining room table, so we had a picnic table in their beautiful dining room. And all I could think of was, I want to get out of here before something gets scratched. Stuff. And we move in there, and of course, I felt as soon as I walked in, this is not good. We shouldn't be here. But before he left, I made sure everything was spotless and clean. And we even inherited their dog for a while. Dad, he didn't like dogs. Anyway, we got out of that. I think Justin and Jonathan were in middle school. Yeah, middle school. They were in middle school. Anyway, we lived there 3 or 4 months, and we knew we couldn't afford this. And we lost money on it because John wanted us to put money down. And then we moved to Kearns, which was, we moved into a pit neighborhood just to get something we could afford. And I fixed it up as best I could. In fact, one of our former bishops from Missouri came and helped us move in, and he said, when he came back, I had fixed it up and painted as much as I could, because the landlord, I said to him, is there any way I can paint this? Because, you know, it was bad. And anyway, when we moved in, the bishop was thinking to himself, this is not a good place to live. But when he came back, he said, I'm really impressed that that we were able to fix it up enough that it looked respectable. But it was a very bad neighborhood. The first week we were there, somebody drove by and shot out our car window. And I babysat for these kids, and that went well for a while. She was a member of the church. She needed a babysitter, so I babysat because I needed money. But she ended up threatening Ashley because Ashley wouldn't share her flower baby that they were supposed to pretend to carry around. I don't know. I think it was somebody else. I don't know if it was Ashley's project or something, but the girl got mad at her anyway and said, my boyfriend is a gang member and he's going to come by and shoot up your place. You know, and I'm thinking, I'm living in this nice little neighborhood here. Plus, while we were living there, one of the schools, they did a locker check and came up with 65 guns. And we went to the elementary school, you know, was right down the street. I could watch the kids. I would stand with the little kids here and watch them go to the school grounds. And then when they came out, I would watch them cross the street and come home. One day I went down there, and Ashley and them came across the street, and right after they came across the street, this gang came right behind them. And then a police cruiser pulled up, made all the gang put their hands on the cruiser, and my kids are still coming at me. And I'm thinking, this is not the best place to be. So we go in for a parent-teacher interview, and talking to the teacher about the fact that Ashley's complaining that as she's in the room, this kid would walk by and pinch her arm down with his pencil on the thing. And she's just a little kid. I don't know how old she was. And she was complaining that there's always fights on the floor in the room. And he said, yeah, that happens. And he said, we very often take knives away from kids. They come to school with knives. I'm thinking, I'm out of here. And by the time this was right after this dovetailed from our experience with these people to this. And then one day, one of Jonathan's friends came over and he said, you should go away this weekend because the Crips and the Bloods have an initiation, and that means that they drive around and to be initiated, you have to do things to prove that you're one of them, and you could get shot or whatever just because if they have their lights off and you blink them, they'll shoot you. If you try to let them know that their lights are off, they pick some reason to shoot you. So we went and visited my cousin for the weekend. But after that, I was fried. And I went back home, and my sister, Dawn, said to me, you look haunted. I said, I wonder why. I did not know what was going to happen next. I was like, let me out of here. So anyway, that was that experience. We went back, and that was when Justin had the issues with the transition, and we homeschooled him for a couple months. But it seemed like every time we come to Utah, there's a big issue, you know? Because when Dad went to school here, there were a couple things that happened, but one that happened was that we became the managers of this little fourplex. That meant we mowed the lawn and weeded the garden and watered and all that. And that took a little bit of rent off. And I was out there working on the garden, and I saw this little kid come around with something, and he was banging on somebody's lights, you know. I didn't hear anything break, but our neighbor lived right, and I knew it was his car, and I said, you know, I didn't hear anything, but I saw this little kid playing over there and banging on your car. You might want to check. He went over and his headlights were bashed in. So he told the mother, and the mother said, my kid didn't do that. He does not have a toy like that. And he took her to court, and small claims, whatever, and he said, will you come to court with me? So I got to go to court and testify against her, and these two women are like, you know, nasty, belligerent type people. And so they tell their little thing, and then the judge wants to know what I saw, and I said, you know, I was out there working, and I saw this little kid and she speaks up and said, but he doesn't have any of those. And I said, well, he wanders around the neighborhood, and he tends to pick up whatever he finds. And you know, he was using, I don't know where he got the mallet. All I know is he had it, and he was bashing them. And so, anyways, judge says, well, we're going to put this down, and I'll send you the whatever in the mail. And so they came home, and they're dancing in the street. I'm not kidding. They were dancing in the street, woo, bleh, you know, like they were being obnoxious to us, you know. And I'm just like, I didn't ask for this, you know. But then a couple days later, they get in the mail that they have to pay to replace those headlights. And then they're fighting with each other. And the funny part is, you know, my kid would never do that. The funny part is the girlfriend comes out to see this kid banging on her headlights. And she runs right back in, you know. It's like, your kid is out there doing it to my car. And I'm thinking, why do I have these experiences? I don't know. In this time frame, as I'm growing up, my cousin, who we always were doing things together, and she wasn't a member of the church, but we were born 10 days apart, and so we were pretty close, did a lot of fun stuff. And I remember I always had this strong sense that the church was true. From the time we joined the church, I don't remember anything before that, and things would happen, and I had a very strong sense of right and wrong and stuff. But anyway, I remember talking to my cousin one day about the church and trying to convince her that the church is true, and, you know, that she should listen, and, you know, this kind of stuff. And she said to me, you know what, I'm going to feel very sorry for you if you get into, you know, you die and you go to heaven and you find out that your church isn't true, you know. And then I thought, well, if I die and I go to heaven and it's not true, then I probably won't have to worry about it, because there probably isn't anything there to worry about, you know. But we had that little thing going on, and I thought it was funny because I was kind of young. And a lot of my life, I did a lot of praying, you know, because of all these experiences. And I had, my parents would go visit. In the winter, I was in school, the bus would come pick me up. And at that time, I was probably first grade or second grade, I don't know, but nobody else was going to school but me. And so they would leave me for about 10 minutes because my dad had to go to work, my mother had to make a connection. And I was scared, so I'd bring the dog in and I would kneel down and pray. And they got home one day and they said, oh, you wouldn't believe what we went through today. They had slid into a snowbank and they couldn't get the car out. The snow was like rock solid around them, but they just slid into it. And when the policeman showed up, he said, I don't understand this at all. How did you slide into this, not wreck your car, not get hurt, and yet it's like solid ice all around you? You know, they pulled them out. And when they got home, I said, I know. I had a prayer before you left this morning. I mean, when you left this morning, I had a prayer that you would be okay, you know, because it had snowed. It was snowy out. So I felt like that was an answer to my prayer. And I let them know it. There were several things that strengthened my testimony. And I'll tell you, one of them is Heavenly Father knows you right down to the little bitty details. And I remember one time feeling I should not write this check. I should not send this check. And I looked at my checkbook and I looked at my other thing and I thought, I don't know why I'm not supposed to do this check. And I felt like I need to write this check. So I wrote it anyway. And it bounced. And it was because, I don't know, somebody didn't, either Dad or I did not write down something that we had spent. And it bounced. But Heavenly Father was telling me that. And I think sometimes He teaches you through these little experiences so that you'll recognize when He's telling you something. You know, because sometimes when you do the right thing, you never know what would have happened. But when you do the wrong thing, you know that you were being prompted and you did not listen. So those little things that don't matter too much, and it wasn't a big deal, you know, but, you know, we had to pay the fees. But anyway, so I had a lot of experiences that kind of strengthened my testimony that way. One of them I remember, I call it the miracle of the macaroni because we didn't have a lot of food. I had made supper. I was in the process of it and it was almost done. And a family came and they had at least 2 big sons and a daughter, and they were grown, and I could tell they were hungry. And I thought, this is cheap macaroni, box macaroni. But I had had it for the day. I was so tired, and I didn't want to make anything else. And I didn't know what to do, and I was just feeling like I should feed them. And I just struggled with that because I thought, I'm going to have to start all over again, and I've had such a bad day, you know. And but I fed them, and I call it the miracle of the macaroni because I fed them, and they were big kids, teenage kids, you know. And maybe they went gently on it or whatever. All I know is it seemed like they were satisfied, and we ate, and we had leftover macaroni. And I never could figure out how we had leftover macaroni. So I called it the miracle of the macaroni. The other was one day they called and they wanted me to do something. Somebody needed something in the ward. And I already had a day full. You know, I've got kids going to sports. I have things I have to do at home and all that. And I was feeling very overwhelmed before they even called me. And I didn't want to not do it, but I didn't want to do it feeling negative about it either. And I was struggling with that. But I finally did it. I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I did it. And it felt like my day was stretched. So I call this the miracle of my day that stretched. Because it seemed like the whole day went very peacefully. I managed to get everything done that needed to be done. And I didn't feel overwhelmed. It just felt like the day went on forever. And so it felt like it was stretched. When you guys went on a mission, I remember when John went, we did not know how we were going to do this. John worked at McDonald's, and he worked at the computer place, and he tried to put away some money, but you always have application fees for college and this and that, and there wasn't a lot. He did what he could, and we knew he did what he could, and so we didn't want him to wait and lose enthusiasm for a mission. We did not know how it was going to happen, but we trusted in that little saying that if I give you a commandment, I'll provide a way. And so I remember we went to the bishop, and we took our check. And I don't know how we got that first check, but I remember we took it in, and the bishop said, somebody is paying for his mission, and I will let you know when you need to bring another check. And I was going through skin cancer, so I went to Jonathan's farewell with this bandage on my nose looking like a bird. And then shortly after he left, Dad ended up falling and breaking his hip. And I remember thinking, this is not good. We hadn't been asked yet to pay any more, but I'm thinking now Dad's going to be out of work, and we'll have these medical expenses. And the bishop gave him a blessing, and I was there when he gave him the blessing, and in the blessing he said, and you will not feel this financially. And we didn't. I can't remember how long he was out of work, but it was a few months. And we got a regular check from his work. And of course somebody was still paying for his mission. And they actually paid for a year. And then the ward split, and we weren't too sure what would happen after that, but we ended up having 2 missionaries out and buying our first house. I mean, that to me is a miracle. Like, how do you buy a house when you've got 2 kids on a mission when you never could before? And so we felt that Heavenly Father blessed us, and we had the money because somehow in that whole mix, we ended up having the money to take care of Jonathan's, but then Justin went out. And so we had 2 missionaries out at the same time. And we had a lot of blessings because of that. They called and asked us to... It's funny, they did the Boston Temple, and I know Ashley really wanted to be at the temple, but we were told that we wouldn't be able to because only a certain amount of people could. And anyways, we weren't going to be able to. And that was fine. We accepted it that was the way it was, but that's okay, And then during the middle of the week, we get a call, and they said, we have some extra tickets, and we would like you to be at the temple. So Ashley got her desire. We got to all go to the temple and be in the temple for the temple dedication. And then 2 days later, I think it was, we got another call, and they said, your family's been chosen to be in the cornerstone ceremony. And of course, you know how that turned out, which was another special honor. And I think it was partly due because we had 2 boys out on a mission, and we didn't know how it was going to all work, but we had the faith that it would work somehow. And it did. All of the boys went on missions and served them successfully. And I don't know how, really, because we have never had much money, but they were all able to go. And I know that it inspired one of my sisters, because I know they felt like it couldn't happen, that they two of their boys probably didn't go on missions because they didn't feel they could do it, and the parents didn't feel like they could support them. And but after that, she saw that it was happening anyway for us. And I think that extra faith and knowing that Heavenly Father really did provide. You know, I had made up my mind that if I had to crawl on my hands and knees to do whatever it took, I would do what I could to get my kids on missions. And they went. So that was a testimony builder for me, that the money was there. And colleges, I can't believe everybody went through college, and some of them without any debt at the end. And I know that lady in the church could be thanked for part of that, because she encouraged everybody to get scholarships and told us that she put herself through school that way. And, you know, Ashley got that, and then everybody else learned from her experience. So we've had other experiences with miracles, with houses and stuff, and I could go on, but Heavenly Father provided. I remember we decided that we needed to be out west, and we weren't really sure, but when we got there, I had been feeling like I wanted to help Justin as much as I could, and I wanted to help Mom, but I didn't know how. They were in two separate areas of the country, how that was going to happen. And we went out to Alex's wedding, and when we were there, all of a sudden something clicked in Dad, and he said, if I can get a job and we can find a house, we're going to stay here and help. Because he felt that Justin would need some support with the boys while he was in Afghanistan. So he went online, looked at this one job, and he got the job by the end of the week. And they had stopped posting it. It was a miracle he got this job. He got the job, and then within a few days, he had a house first to move into. Now, the house was a little bit more than we could. Well, I think we had to pay $1,000 a month, which isn't something we usually go for. But it had 2 kitchens, and my mother had a desire, I'm sure in the back of her mind, to have her own place, and because of things that transpired, she didn't have her own home anymore. And so we thought, wow, maybe she'd like to do this. So we called her up and told her, look, we have the house that has 2 kitchens. We can live downstairs, and because of her disability, you can live upstairs and have your own apartment for a while. So for a couple of, well, actually it was for a year. I wish we could have stayed there for a longer time, because she loved it there. And she did come, and she helped us with rent and stuff. So it didn't end up costing us as much for rent. And we had a lot of fun. She'd never lived in Provo area and stuff, and never been able to see some of the fun things that they have going on at BYU, and she got to do so many things. So that all came together within a week of Dad, making that decision. So we felt that Heavenly Father's hand was in it, because it all fell into place. And we have had that experience before, when it falls into place, like selling our house back east. Just, we decided to move, put it on market, had a offer, and then it was sold within the next it was finalized within the next 2 weeks. So we know that Heavenly Father, if we're where we're supposed to be, we feel like He helps it happen. And we've had that happen over and over. One thing that's important about our history a little bit is we never had a lot of money, but it seemed like every so often we would be taking in somebody. And sometimes that was a little helpful, and sometimes, it was just whatever. But My sister, Marcy, lived with us for a little while. Cyndee, a friend of somebody's, they were having some, whatever, for a little while they needed her to come stay with us for a while, so she did. We had Missy, our niece, come stay with us, and she actually joined the church when she was with us. My mom, Justin and the kids, and we had the DeMontanes. So over the years, we've had not just us, but there have been other people staying with us. And we've enjoyed those experiences. When I was in Missouri, there was a time when I was really stressed, and I don't think ever in my life I have ever kind of doubted that the church was true, but at that point, things were so stressful, I didn't know what to think. And I remember walking around saying to myself, and praying kind of, is this really true? Is Heavenly Father really there? Is Jesus really real? And I remember I was teaching in primary, and they came out with a new song that they were learning for their primary, and it was, Heavenly Father, are you really there? And it was exactly what I was asking. Are you really there? You know, can you hear and answer my prayer? And so that really felt like an answer to my prayer, but also I remember I had one night when I was struggling before I heard this song. I went to sleep, and it felt just like this thick darkness came over me, and I couldn't call out. I felt like I couldn't call out, but I remembered that in my head, Jesus is more powerful. And when I said that in my head, I woke up and I was okay, you know. But then I also had a dream, and it's kind of a personal dream. But because I kept wondering if Jesus was real, in that dream, it answered that question for me. And I remember saying to myself in the dream, Jesus is real, because of what I was seeing. And I was telling my kids, Jesus is real. And that whole thing happened within, a little bit of a span of time there. It didn't happen all the same day, but it helped me. It strengthened me and helped me know that he knew me and was telling me, this is real. I'm real. And so that was probably my most powerful experience with a meaningful active searching, because up until that point, I think I always believed. And it wasn't until I was going through that I was questioning for the first time in my life, I really have a testimony of the priesthood power. Dad was very available to giving blessings if I needed one. If I couldn't go to sleep, even, he would give me a blessing and I would fall right to sleep. He did that with the baby. I stayed up all night with you one night, and you were crying, and I was like, we did not have a door on the bedroom, so I was afraid it was going to keep Dad awake, because there was an open stairway and a living room kitchen area and no doors. And so I had to go in the bathroom. And I mean, this went on with the baby, crying and crying. And I got tired of holding you, so I put you in the baby carrier, sat you in the tub without water, but just to keep you in a room with a door so Dad wouldn't wake up. And finally, I just got too tired. And I took you upstairs and I woke Dad up. And I said, I just can't do this anymore. and he gave you a blessing, and 5 minutes later you were sound asleep. And I wished I had done it way earlier, because I spent all night walking around. But so many times he had given me a blessing when I hadn't felt well or whatever, and I felt fine. I was able to do more and get through it. If you want to know anything about callings that I've had, I think the most unusual one was typing patriarchal blessings, and it was quite interesting. And it's funny because you don't remember after you've typed them who they were for. And you're not supposed to, but I never could remember. The only thing I can remember distinctly was somebody was given a blessing, and they were told that they should actively work towards creating a better environment, and I don't know what that meant for him, but maybe for his life work, he was trying to work on how to clear the air of some of this, or water, or who knows what. But anyway, that was the most interesting one, and I'm sure they were all interesting, but that stuck with me over the years. And I've done just about everything else there is. I can't think of much that I have missed. I think the most fun calling, the ones I have enjoyed the most, have been nursery. As the kids are so sweet and loving, and I just love being creative with them. And I love making it so inviting. I loved it. In fact, and I think the kids loved it because I loved it. They liked to come in because they knew I liked being there, and it was not a drag for me. I liked coordinating it so that, if we were studying animals, we had stuffed animals that looked like animals, and we had books that had stories about animals, and we would have cookie cutters that made animal cheese pieces or whatever. I liked doing that. It was fun for me, and I'm not intimidated by little kids. I like little kids, so I think they felt that when they came. And I did have an experience where somebody from the stake was visiting, and his son came right in, and he said, "I don't know what you're doing in here, but I cannot get him to go to his nursery." So as soon as they came in, I tried to engage them in a hands-on activity that distracted them, and I think that's part of it. As far as my blessing went, there were two things that I mentioned: the happiness thing, and that made me feel like Heavenly Father knew who I was, because nobody knew what I had said in my head about what I would choose to have if I could choose anything. But the other thing was, I was told that I would be blessed to live in many places. And when I was 14, I had decided all I wanted was to live in one place for the rest of my life, with a nice little picket fence around it and my little family. And I got this blessing, and I'm like, I don't want to live in many places. But it said I would be blessed to live in many places. And I think though it's been challenging, it's also been rewarding. And then I think my children are more bonded to each other than their friends. And I know we spent a lot of time with you guys growing up in Concord, so you probably were in one area, but Maine, New Hampshire, Utah, Connecticut, Missouri, Wisconsin, Arizona, Utah. A few times in Utah, back and forth. I don't think there was anything else. We just keep adding to it. But we have friends all over the place. We go to the temple sometimes. We run into them in different places that we didn't expect. We made a friend when Walter was going to BYU for his master's degree. We made a really good friend. And we went to the Washington, D.C. temple one time and ran into that really good friend who was there for someone's wedding, and they came and visited with us for a while. So, it's been a blessing in that I think we've worked through some tough stuff sometimes, and our families connected. The children especially are connected to each other more maybe than most because of it. And we've made all these friends all over the world. Not all over the world. Well, actually, you could say that because I knew somebody who was from Africa in one of those areas, spent a lot of time with her. People from China, people from just other places in the world that I would have never run into normally, maybe, if I hadn't moved around. So I guess you could start with my parents' conversion. Okay, and my mom was visiting my aunt, and my aunt was taking the discussions, and they invited her to come in, and she did not feel like she wanted to do that. However, my mom and dad were looking for a church to go to, because when he was in the army, he thought he was going to die, and he made a promise to God that he would find a church if he survived. And so he felt that he needed to do that. And his family was pretty much atheist, so that was a major thing for my dad. And so they were trying to do this, find a church. Little by little, she'd get closer and she'd hear a little bit more, and she finally started listening. And she finally said to my dad, "You really need to come hear these guys." So my dad did. My dad got very interested, and my mother started to back off and felt like she needed a sign. And then she would join the church. Well, then my dad was downstairs in the basement, and he put something in the fire, and he described it as it felt like a fire was chasing him. And it burned him all down one side, and he went to the hospital, and the missionaries came and asked him if he wanted a blessing. And in the blessing, he was told that he would have no scars and that he would have no pain, which was amazing to the doctors because my dad had no pain. And this lady had come in, and she'd been burnt with coffee and was in agony, and they could not believe that Dad had no pain, and he never had any scars. And so he knows that was answered. That was a miracle for him, and my mother knew it. She could not deny it. And so she always taught us, don't pray for a sign, because you don't know what you're going to get. So I never dared pray for a sign. So they joined the church, and shortly after that, the missionaries back then didn't always come with purse or script. They had to live off other people and stuff. And my parents invited them to live in our apartment. And my dad was in construction, and in the winter, sometimes you're laid off for the winter. And he was only getting a little pension, something like $25 a week or something, I don't know. So he had to pay rent and get food and all that. And it got to a point, my mom was very good at making things go, and both their parents had farms. So they usually, when they'd see him, I'm sure they were able to get milk and eggs, that kind of stuff every now and then. But there came a point in my life when I wanted an egg for breakfast, and I was just a little toddler. And I was being very feisty about it, and I would not quit. And my mom finally said, "You cannot have an egg because we don't have enough money, and we don't have it." And the missionaries overheard it. And they did not know my parents were struggling. And so after that, they helped a little bit when they could. And so it's better. But anyway, they went through that whole winter. Oh, and my dad insisted on paying tithing. And remember, they're fairly new at this. They just joined the church not too long ago. He insisted on paying tithing. And my mother was kind of distressed a little bit because she said, you can't even feed your daughter an egg and we're paying tithing? Okay. Anyway, they got through that, and the next spring, my dad decided he was going to look for a house. And my mother's like, are you kidding me? We do not have a down payment, and he's going to go look for a house. Just going through this horrible winter, you know. But he asked around, and somebody mentioned a house, a farm. It was 120 acres, and it had a barn, and it was on two sides of the road. I remember it had a beaver pond down on one side and a stream that ran through. And anyway, he found this farm and he was able to get it. And I have to look up the details. I don't remember exactly, except that I know it was very little. All he had to do was pay for the back taxes, which is like a few $100s. And then he had to pay a month, take over the mortgage that was already in existence because it was foreclosed on. And it was because it had been in existence for so long, it was a very low payment, like 100 and something, maybe a month, whatever it was very low. And so it was a big mess. It needed cleaning, had no indoor plumbing, but my dad was in construction and my mom was a hard worker. And I remember us scrubbing floors and dumping loads of mud out the door. And we had to use a little outdoor, well, it was actually in the shed. You didn't go out of the house to it, but it was towards the other end of the house. So it was kind of creepy at night. And it was not someplace I liked to go, in this little outhouse. But my dad very quickly put in plumbing for the bathroom, so that was great. And we lived there for about 20 years. I lived there most of my life. They moved the year after I graduated. Now, this aunt who was investigating the church joined the church with her family. My mother and my father joined the church with their family, and my other uncle, who is the brother of the two sisters, joined the church with his family. And then there were only a couple other families. I was the Hiltons and the Gardners, and I've since found out that we're probably related to the Hiltons back in our genealogy, but I haven't hooked up to them. But this lady taught us. So this little core group in Skowhegan started this branch. And I remember my mother constantly baking. They had more bake sales. We cooked more pies, we made more donuts, we made more fudge, and they had more bake sales than I can, whatever. They were always cooking to make money, because back then you could not build your building. You had to take care of your heat and all that. And somebody donated, I think it was the Hiltons, the building that we finally met in. They bought the building. The Gardners lived upstairs to take care of it, and they opened up all the rooms downstairs, and we met in those rooms for our open service. It was kind of L-shaped. Then when they actually could build the chapel, my father was in construction, my uncle was in construction, and they built the chapel. They had to raise a certain amount of money to build the chapel, and it was only one phase, but we loved the fact that we had our own little chapel. And now it's a ward, many years later. My parents during this time were called to be in the mission presidency for young women and men. They didn't call it that back then. It was MIA, but now they don't because it's connected to the other. But once a month they had to go to Boston, and President Packer was the mission president. which would have been like stake president now, and then they were, but so they were in the mission MIA. And because we lived in Maine, that was quite a trip. And sometimes my dad would take me along just so it wouldn't be such a lonely ride. And sometimes my mom had to be there too. And I remember after one of the meetings with President Packer, they had us all sit down. We all had ice cream sundaes with his family, and that was kind of cool. And one other time, my cousin and I both went, and one of President Packer's sons and his friend took my cousin and I down into Boston somewhere, some kind of youth kind of place. And then we went back home, and they had a little dance in their house. And one of the things I remember was that when President Packer wanted that dance to end, he put on this fancy, like, Mozart or Beethoven or something music, and all the kids knew the dance was over, and they left. So that was kind of fun. It's very quiet, very sincere, very busy, you know. So my dad spent more time talking. He wasn't one, Dad said, for sitting around and chit-chatting, because he just had too much to do. He had a big family too. I mean, his family, these were the older sons, so he had, I think, 8 kids. So he was busy besides doing that. And I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but if I remember correctly, when he lived before he was called, they had a farm out in the country and stuff, and he really didn't know how he was going to support himself if he did this calling. I don't remember how that all worked out for him, but obviously it worked out because he ended up on his mission, and then, you know, he had the faith, he and his wife and his family, to do the stuff that he needed to do. My grandfather, over the years, my parents tried to convert my mother's father, and he said, "I'm older than you, I think I know more than you do, I don't think I need this." And he never listened. But he had a dream one time. My grandmother had passed away, and it was my grandmother Evelyn, and he felt that she was getting further away from him. And then the missionaries came by one day when he was out haying, and he said, "I don't have time." And they said, "Well, we'll help you." So they took off their coats and they went out there and helped him, and he was so impressed that he decided to listen to them. And shortly after that, my parents went to church, and somebody said, "Oh, there's going to be a baptism next Sunday." That's always a big thing in Maine, to get a baptism, you know. And my mom said, where are they from? And they said, "Clinton." "Oh, we know people in Clinton." Come to find out, it was her father who had refused to listen all these years, and he was baptized. And within that year, he became an elder just before he died. But I remember he used to smoke a pipe, and he was chewing gum forever after that. He would come to church faithfully every week. He was totally different after that. My dad loved to do not genealogy. Well, he did do genealogy, but he didn't do that. He usually hired somebody a little bit because he wasn't real good at that kind of stuff. And my mom didn't do a whole lot of it because my Aunt Bev was the genealogist in the family, and she kept her up to date with everything. My dad was a missionary, though. He never went on a mission, but he always accepted all his callings. He always felt you need to be to church 15 minutes early because President Packer said, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. And don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was President Packer that drummed that into him, because he said that it was necessary to be there early enough so if they needed to call on you to say a prayer or anything, or anything, you know, if somebody else didn't show up, that they could do that. And so my dad always was a stickler for that and being reverent. I had many a lecture on my way home from my dad about not talking in church to my friends. But I remember him as a missionary. We would stop at an ice cream store, any place. He always brought up the church somehow. They had this little pin, a little question mark on it. And he would say, you know what that is? And I said, no, it's a question mark. Yeah. And then he'd talk about the church, you know. Do you wonder where you ever came, where you came from, or where you're going, or whatever? He'd use that to start off. And so we'd be sitting there waiting for a while for ice cream calls. He didn't keep them too long, but he wasn't afraid to talk to them. And the way he did it made them feel very comfortable. In fact, this guy kept coming to church. And finally, one day, my dad was sitting beside him and said, you know, you always come. How come you never got baptized? And he said, the guy turned to him and said, because nobody ever asked me. And my dad said, oh, would you like to get baptized? And so the guy got baptized, you know. And there was this, I remember this other guy. He was an interesting person, and they helped him to learn a little more about how to do things. Maybe, I don't know if he didn't have a lot of education or whatever, but I remember they helped him. There was another guy that joined the church, and I don't know if my dad had anything to do with it, but he stuttered. And they called him to be in the bishopric somehow, or branch presidency, and he was really nervous about doing it, but he did it. And his stuttering went way down. He was able to do that calling, even though, and they told me also about a person who had cancer, and they had given him a blessing, and he was cured. So a lot of miracles seemed to happen back then. It seemed like they joined the church and they worked really hard to do it. We drove 12 miles to Sacrament, then 12 miles back. Then we went, not Sacrament, to Sunday school. 12 in the morning on Sunday, 12 miles to Sunday school and back. And then in the evening, it was 12 miles to Sacrament and back. And then during the week, we had 12 miles to Relief Society and back, and primary and back, and mutual and back. We spent our whole life running around getting to these meetings, and then they condensed them, so it was better. My dad converted my cousin's husband, worked with my dad for a while in construction, and while they were camping out in a trailer, working someplace away from home, my dad taught him the gospel. And I found out also later that my dad, when nobody was around, he had nothing to do. If he saw that somebody needed some help, like maybe their steps needed to be repaired, he would try to repair stuff on the QT somehow for these people. And they didn't know who did the work because he wanted to help people without them knowing. He said he paid tithing on stuff people even gave to us. Like if somebody gave us a bag of clothes, he paid tithing on it. He always paid tithing and fast offering. And I think our family was blessed for it. Mom had a lot of faith. After everything was said and done, she was a hard worker in the church. She always, I remember her working hard on her lessons, anything she was supposed to do, and she liked to follow the church directions, and the manuals and stuff. I remember one time she had to go, because of her calling in the stake, she had to go out west to a general I don't know if it was general conference, but it was out there for some kind of conference and training. And I remember all those counselors, or president and counselors and her, all were going out west, and they actually took me with them. So I got to see this a little bit in action. I didn't go to the meetings, but I got to go out west. Anyway, my mom one time was in a car accident. It hit her side and it broke her arm. They went to the doctors and had it x-rayed, and it was broken, and it was very uncomfortable. But she was in a branch, and she felt very... People had to talk so many times over and over. She just felt like she needed to do her talk she was supposed to do that week, because it wouldn't be fair to other people to have to do another talk when it was her turn. So even though she was in pain and her arm was broken, she went and gave this talk, and she had a blessing. And Monday, they were going to go back in to the doctors, and they were going to set it and put it in a cast. But they said they had to wait because of the swelling. They have to let the swelling go down, because the cast will be too loose once the swelling goes down. So she went back on Monday, and they x-rayed it again, because it can move during that time. And when they x-rayed it, they said, "We don't know what happened here, but your arm is not broken anymore." And we just really felt that because of Mom's faith and her willingness to go ahead and do that talk when she didn't feel well, then she was blessed, and that her arm was healed. So that's one of her experiences. She also was not supposed to have any children. The doctors, when she was younger, she got pneumonia, and it created a problem with her lungs. And they said if she had any children, it could rupture and she could die. But she had her patriarchal blessing. It said she would have sons and daughters, and she felt that if Heavenly Father wanted her to have sons and daughters, she would have sons and daughters. So she had them, and she said the interesting thing was, even though the doctor said this wasn't good for her, whenever she was pregnant, she felt the best. And she didn't know if that was because when she was pregnant, the baby kind of pushed up, and it might have closed the little pocket that was there. But she still could have had problems with delivery, but she never did. So she felt that was a blessing, that Heavenly Father blessed her. And she had 2 daughters and a son and 2 daughters. And, that's 5 kids. And her blessing had said sons and daughters. So she was like, especially in her condition, because she had this condition, she felt like she needed to still have more babies. And she did. She had 2 sons at the end. And I remember on the last one, I remember how she just felt like she would get tired really easy because of the condition and everything. And I remember her feeling, and I was old enough to pick up on that, how she was feeling. And she was feeling overwhelmed, like, I can't do this anymore, because she was on number 7, and she had health issues. And I remember praying to Heavenly Father that, if possible, this could be the last one for her, and that it would be an easy delivery, so she wouldn't have any problems, because she'd had a couple of issues with some of them. And that was her last child. She never had another one, and she said it was the easiest pregnancy and delivery she'd ever had. So I felt like my prayer had been answered for her, because I knew it was hard for her. And even though I was the oldest child and I felt that I had to carry a lot of that, and sometimes I did resent it. I also knew that Heavenly Father wanted me to do it. And so I felt that Heavenly Father was preparing me or helping me for the future. I would be well trained, maybe, to be a mom someday. My parents got through the Depression because their families were farmers. And for farmers, it was easier because they at least had food and they had a place to be. And they were dairy farmers. Both of them were dairy farmers. So they provided milk, and they had eggs that they raised. They had their own milk. They had all the food they raised in their gardens and their orchards. And so it was because of that they got through the Depression. Oh, I forgot to mention that my grandmother, Evelyn, the missionaries had come by. Back then they traveled without purse or script and did not have apartments. And so when they traveled, they would ask people if they could stay at their house, in their barn or something, someplace to sleep during the night. And they came to my grandmother's and she allowed them to do that. And my aunt found out about it. It happened to be actually my mother's aunt, because it was my grandmother's sister. Wasn't happy about the fact that she was listening to the missionaries, and so my grandmother didn't continue, but she was somewhat interested. And when she died. Well, she had tuberculosis. She spent a lot of time in the sanitarium, because back then you couldn't be out if you didn't. It was contagious. So it was hard on my mom because her mom wasn't around, and she was kind of a middle child, or next to the last anyway. I'm sure it affected her not having her mother around when she needed her and stuff. But when she died, there were people who did the work, and this one lady said she felt very strongly that my grandmother was there, that she accepted the work. And I believe that, because then my grandfather had that dream where she was getting further away, and then he joined the church, He did remarry, and she was a wonderful person. She really loved her first husband. She never got interested in the church. But both of them loved their first spouse. They loved each other, but they really loved their first spouses. My dad always, in his genealogy, said somebody in our family supposedly was hung as a witch. And I never could find the connection, and he could never tell me where the connection was. And I've since discovered that the Rich line may have had, I think it's Martha Corey, who was somehow a Rich before that, either married to a Rich or a Rich, but we still can't find out where it is, except that it is in written language that I've run across. So he had that, but then I ran across a line that my grandmother on the Weber side goes right into that witch trial thing, and there were a lot of our relatives, the Toothacres direct line, that were involved, and many of those people who died were faithful, God-fearing people, and because they refused to lie and say, I am a witch, they were killed. Those who admitted that they were a witch and they did it to save themselves were not put to death. And so it was these good people who said, I'm not going to lie and say I'm a witch. I know. And they were very good people. There was a lot of other stuff going on at the time, political stuff, squabbles over the land and other things that they think affected this hysteria that took place. But the people weren't what they were being accused of. And it's just weird to me, or whatever, to know that good people were killed because they refused to lie. And so there's that story. We have relatives that were killed by Indians. I've run across that, and I don't know, it's hard for the rich line to get across. I think I've got as close as anybody to a person being born in the time frame that was supposed to be born, but all it says is that the father, his name was Richard Rich, but his father's name, they just put Rich down there. So we don't know who. But it's in a totally different area than they expected. People are trying to connect us to Lord Chancellor Rich, and he was a terrible person. He was responsible for torturing people. And after doing all the history work that I've done, I don't care if I'm related to him. But this other group seems like it's more religious and more earthy. And the more I've become aware of the kings and the queens and all the craziness that goes on in that, I don't care if I don't know who would want to be a queen or a king, because there's always some intrigue, death-threatening, whatever involved. And they, a lot of times, the ones that were good, people didn't respect, and the ones that, it seemed like the ones that treated them with more authority and stuff, the people were afraid of, but they respected them, and it's like really twisted, I had a great-grandfather, I guess it was, that was a game warden in Maine. That means they, like if somebody's, like, there are certain times of the year that you're allowed to, or certain areas of the forest where you're allowed to, shoot animals and stuff. And he enforced the rules. You have to have a license. Even back then, there were certain rules. You can't, sometimes if there was posted land, you cannot shoot anybody's. If you have posted land, you're not supposed to be on it for any reason. And that means you have signs on the fences and stuff surrounding your land saying nobody's allowed on this property. So, I don't know, they do that kind of thing. Or if there was some kind of wild animal that got out of control, they might be the ones that have to make sure that it's taken care of so somebody doesn't get hurt.